Welcome back to the channel. This is 20 Storm and you are watching What If Naruto was sent to Soul City after Sasuke Retrieval arc. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Well, I'd say that it's about time we finish this little battle, and all of the battles we've had since we became a team. Sasuke yelled. However, this was not the Sasuke that almost all of the girls in his age group and the civilians of Konohagakure adored. No, Sasuke had long since vanished, and in his place had been something that one could only imagine in nightmares. A number of the young kunoichi fell in love with the enigmatic, reclusive boy, but he was no longer there. He was replaced by a monstrous creature with gray skin, ash-colored hair, and wings that resembled enormous hands with tiny fingers. Protruding from all over them, the Sharingan was still discernible as the cornea, but the sclera of his eyes was jet black. There was a black shuriken-shaped mark in the center of his nose, and his lips appeared to be covered in black lipstick, with enlarged teeth that protruded like fangs. His opponent could have frightened any ordinary bystander if the Uchiha's appearance wasn't already unnerving. A boy in an orange jumpsuit, torn and scratched in several places, stood a few feet away from the winged avenger. The most obvious damage was the hole in front of and behind his right shoulder, which looked as if someone had punched through him with a fist. A pair of sharp, whisker-like marks appeared on the boy's face, as though they were carved into each cheek. His eyes had the appearance of a demon because they were dark red and had thin pupil slits. His entire body was encircled by a massive mass of boiling red chakra in the shape of a fox, which completed his frightful appearance. Two massive statues of Konoha's founding fathers stood on opposite sides of the rocky base of a large waterfall, which served as their battleground. Hashirama Senju, the Shodem Hokage, was located to the right of the waterfall. Madara Uchiha, the first original leader of the Uchiha clan, stood directly in front of the Senju monument. This particular region was given the moniker, the Valley of the End, because of the infamous conflict between the two founding fathers, which permanently changed the terrain to commemorate the eternal struggle between them. The Konoha people carved massive statues of the fighters on either side of the massive waterfall. The irony of the current situation, however, was that a similar epic battle was being fought. Sasuke Uchiha, the top rookie of his graduating class from the Ninja Academy, was standing by Madara's side, trying to defect from Konoha to train under the treacherous snake Sannin Orochimaru. Naruto Uzumaki, the dead last among his peers and the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, was on Hashirama's side. Why was he here? He was a member of the group tasked with capturing Sasuke and returning him to Konoha. Regretfully, Orochimaru's personal guard, 5 dangerous Auto Nin who were extremely skilled at using the traitorous Sannin's curse mark, were the ones who brought Sasuke to Odokagure. Each member of the retrieval team had to fight one Auto Nin on their own as they battled these ninja. As a result, Naruto was left to hunt down the renegade Sasuke alone in the hopes of trying to reason with his errant teammate. Naruto had pursued the outlaw until he eventually caught up to him at the monument, but to the young blonde's horror, Sasuke was determined to leave Konoha and would kill anyone who stood in his way because Naruto considered Sasuke to be a bit of a jerk of a friend. That part had truly hurt him. He was compelled to use the Kyuubi's chakra and act against the Uchiha after Sasuke had attempted to kill him twice. Sasuke was unable to hit the Kyuubi-powered genin with a single blow, giving the youthful Uzumaki a much-needed advantage. Sasuke, who never lets anyone outdo him, used his Heaven Curse Mark's second stage to level the playing field for the Uchiha. Both fighters were near death after a protracted and intense battle, but they still had enough strength for one last assault. However, each fighter had a different interpretation of the last attack. It was Naruto's final opportunity to fulfill his vow to Sakura and bring Sasuke back. It was Sasuke's only opportunity to escape the village that had been preventing him from moving forward and to finally exact revenge on Itachi. This will put a stop to it. As they prepared their last moves, the two ninjas thought. Condensed bluish-white sparks were produced as Sasuke pushed his left palm toward the ground and started to channel lightning chakra. However, the chirping sound that typically accompanied the jutsu was replaced with a sound akin to flapping wings as Sasuke started to channel the chakra of the curse mark into the attack, turning the sparks into a frightening black hue. In the meantime, Naruto was making every effort to create a Rasengan, but he was encountering some challenges. He required 2 hands to execute the jutsu properly because the prolonged use of the Kyuubi's chakra had numbed his left arm. Nevertheless, Naruto focused on using his right hand to form a Rasengan, unaware that the demon fox's influence was the cause of the chakra's size and color. He was surprised to feel the chakra beginning to condense. A layer of red demonic chakra encircled the spiraling purple sphere formed by the chakras, further condensing, determining to end the fight with a single blow. The two fighters wasted no time in launching themselves at each other, closing the gap in a matter of seconds. Chidori. Rasengan. A fierce battle broke out between the two jutsus, with each attempting to defeat the other. The two distinct forms of chakra created a tremendous reaction that grew until it swallowed up the two shinobi and split the waterfall's cascading water. A moment later, the sphere burst into a dazzling light that had never been seen before. Alongside Kakashi, the sight he saw from a distance left Kakashi speechless. Before either of them killed the other, he had hoped to reach his students in time. However, he was clearly too late. He reflected on the early days of his genin team as he made his way to his students. He reflected on everything that had happened to them. Attempting to determine what had gone wrong, he could have attempted to spend an equal amount of time with each of his students and could have done a few things differently, but the situation simply became too complex. Sasuke's predicament required the greatest attention following everything that transpired, including the team's first high-ranked mission and the Chunin exams. How else, after all, could he have fought Gaara and survived? As he and Pakun doubled their speed, Kakashi thought, "I just hope that I can get there in time to at least keep the damage to a minimal." Sasuke and Naruto battled valiantly to win the battle inside the sphere. The strength of their attacks was being drastically diminished to their own natural chakra, and both of them were aware that they needed to end the battle quickly as they were approaching their limits. The boys simultaneously directed their attacks in different directions. Sasuke's Chidori moved downward, while Naruto's Rasengan moved upward. Naruto's chest was pierced by the lightning-style jutsu, which went through the middle and out the other side. Despite being severely weakened, Naruto was able to keep the Rasengan in place despite feeling the traitor's jutsu tear into his body and the blood rush towards his mouth. Naruto thrust his hand towards Sasuke's head, making contact with the region surrounding his left eye. As the blonde's desperation finally reached its peak, the two genin fought with all their strength despite the terrible pain they were both experiencing until the intense light became unbearable and they lost focus. Then everything darkened. Naruto regained consciousness after what felt like an eternity. He stood up instantly upon seeing Sasuke Uchiha's rumpled body not far from his location. The young turncoat appeared to be gripping the region around his left eye as he struggled to stand. After a few tries, Sasuke finally got to his feet, but he was struggling to stay upright. He saw that blood was leaking through Sasuke's fingers as he stumbled slowly to where Naruto was standing. Sasuke abruptly paused to catch his breath, then carefully withdrew his hand to expose the most horrific wound Naruto had ever seen up close. Sasuke's left eye looked intact, but the surrounding tissue was ruthlessly ripped apart, mutilated, and covered in blood. Sasuke's eye was in the middle of the wounds, which looked like a large, red circle. "I don't want to hurt you anymore, but I will if I must," exclaimed Naruto, who was surprised that he wasn't exhausted or sore all over. "Are you finally ready to come home, Sasuke? It looks like you can barely stand up, let alone fight." The fact that Sasuke was acting as though he didn't exist, as if he were invisible or something, made him think that was even stranger. Naruto yelled, "Hey, Sasuke, are you listening to me?" in the hopes that his louder voice would awaken Sasuke from his reverie. To his dismay, however, Sasuke remained silent and began to limp in Naruto's direction once more, as if he was resolved to get closer to him. He continued even though it sounded like the Uchiha was dying with each step. Naruto's last nerve finally gave out as a result of this. "Hey, you fucking bastard. Answer me, WH. However, the blonde's tirade was effectively cut short by what transpired next. Sasuke simply walked right through him as if he were an illusion, rather than pushing him away or resuming the fight as Naruto had anticipated. For some inexplicable reason, Naruto felt so exhausted that he fell to his hands and knees as he attempted to turn around. In spite of this unexpected development, Naruto forced himself to shift his body in order to see Sasuke's direction. He was able to move his body to see what Sasuke was walking towards, even though it felt like he was trying to crawl around with 500 pounds strapped to his body. However, he never wanted to see, much less understand, what he saw with his own eyes. Sasuke was standing directly in front of him, gazing down at his own body, which had a large, bloody hole where his heart should have been. Blood was already pouring steadily from the wound. As though unable to comprehend that he had killed Naruto, Sasuke simply gazed at the body of his former adversary. Sasuke was forced to hack up the blood that suddenly rushed up to his throat. Sasuke fell to his knees from exhaustion as the blood spattered onto the face of the corpse. His face just inches from making contact with it. His headband fell off his head and clattered to the ground, next to the head. As he gazed at the now dead face, then Sasuke's expression changed to a smirk. Sasuke sneered and clutched at his left eye after saying, "Hey, just like I predicted, not a scratch on my headband." As Sasuke turned to face outside the Valley of the End, Naruto noticed that his right eye was changing and twisted until it scarcely resembled a Sharingan. But, I didn't expect you to actually go for a crippling shot. I'll give you that eye. I think you might have blinded me. I may have lost the ability to use the Sharingan in this eye. It featured a red star with 6 points on top of a black background. Sasuke took one final look at Naruto's body as he stood up and started to move through him, heading for the line that separated Hai no Kuni from Oto no Kuni. Before turning around and heading back towards Otogakure, Sasuke mutely remarked, "For all it's worth, I really wish that someone else that tried to stop me." After gaining some control over his shock, Naruto attempted to pursue the fleeing Sasuke once more but stumbled and fell to the ground. He heard a familiar rattling sound, but this time it was different. Naruto was startled to see a long chain extending from where his heart should have been. When he looked down, he tugged the chain a few times and discovered that it was connected to the ground in some way. Trying to break the chain off of himself, Naruto yelled, "Wah! What the hell is going on here? Why did Sasuke go through me like that? Why are there two of me? And why am I chained to the ground? I don't understand what's going on." He had lost the ability to think rationally. It was as if he were trapped in a nightmare. He couldn't bear the sight of his own body with the huge hole in his chest. A relaxed voice behind the blonde said, "If I were you, kiddo, I wouldn't be yanking on that." The blonde, who was now frightened, instantly stopped tugging at his chain and turned to look behind him at the person who had just spoken. His expectations were not met by what he saw. A girl who was roughly 3 years his senior stood behind him. She wore her sandy blonde hair in 2 pigtails and had bright brown eyes with a few freckles on her cheeks. Somehow, Naruto saw a tooth that resembled fangs protruding from her left upper lip. She wore a white hakama himo, tabi socks, waraji shoes, and a black hakama and kasode. In addition, he saw that she had a badge of some kind fastened to her left upper arm. At the moment, she was looking straight at Naruto's location. "Trust me, kiddo, you do not want to damage the chain you're pulling on. Once it breaks and corrodes, well, let's just say there are fates far worse than dying," she added for good measure. Naruto was so shocked to see the girl staring at him that he stopped pulling on his chain and turned to face the odd girl, who didn't appear to be alarmed to see him shackled next to a dead body that looked exactly like him. For hours, they appeared to be in that state, until the girl made the decision to speak up. The girl's previously composed expression changed to one of agitation as she interrupted, "Oi, stop staring at me like that. It's already obvious that I can see you." Naruto almost yelled, What? Are you serious? Can you really see me? Are you not trying to trick me? Please tell me what kind of girl you think I am. I never make jokes about my job or the dead," she said gravely. "What? I'm dead? What do you mean? How can you see me if I'm dead? Who, or what are you? Huh? Answer me." The frantic blonde was instantly silenced when she yelled, "Hey, don't take that tone me, bub. It's not my fault that bastard ran you through with that flashy lightning attack. If you weren't dead, then why is there another you laying on the ground, stained with your blood? And as for how I know all of this, I'm a Shinigami, it's my job." As a fox would do when it sees something confusing, the blonde cocked his head slightly to the side in response. "I'm sorry, but when you say Shinigami, do you mean?" After hearing the unasked question more than 1,000 times, the girl simply rolled her eyes. In the hopes that this soul would stop questioning, she responded bluntly, "That's right, I'm what your people call a soul reaper." She didn't want to stay any longer than was absolutely required. With the intention of performing the kanso as fast as possible and then returning to her quarters to rest, she approached the recently deceased with brusqueness. When the soul abruptly leapt away from her, she became even more irritated. The Soul Reaper was taken aback by that small accomplishment, even though it later collapsed in a heap, huffing as if it had just finished 5 marathons in a row. Pluses, also known as benign souls, had some degree of mobility, but prolonged periods of vigorous movement left them feeling very tired. It would only be a matter of time until they became hollows, even though they could move more easily once their chain of fate was broken. The girl yelled, "Hey, what's your problem? I'm trying to help you out here," as she attempted to approach the blonde soul but was once more forced to dodge another blow that she nearly missed. Between deep breaths, Naruto answered, "I don't need your help." Even though he was totally worn out, he wasn't going to let the creature that had condemned him to a difficult existence rule him. "And what, pray tell, makes you think that?" Naruto, wearing deep pants, growled, "I've already had one of your kind fuck my life up by sealing the Kyuubi into me as a baby, and I refuse to be toyed with by you and your kind again." His eyes showed that he was still prepared to fight. After merely staring at Naruto, the girl looked to her right while muttering something he could hear what she called a fucking jabakurai, but he was unable to understand what she was saying to herself. You clearly know what's happening to me, so I demand that you tell me what the hell is going on. Hey, don't act like I'm not even here. This was a mistake because the pig-tailed girl appeared in front of him right away, clutching him by the jacket collar just inches from her face. You have no right to use that tone of voice around me. You have no idea how easily I can crush you like a bug brat. Who in the world do you think you're speaking to? She growled. That's a snobby, uncivilized, savage-looking bitch of a Shinigami. Even though he was very close to the death god, Naruto sprang back when he heard a loud metallic snap and then something that sounded like someone chewing metal. Naruto looked down to see that the chain was no longer fastened to the ground and that the links that were farthest from his heart had developed mouths and were eating and chewing into themselves. Ah! Now what the devil is happening? The mouthed links started chewing more quickly, if anything, as Naruto yanked himself free from the Shinigami's hold and swung the chain around in a fruitless attempt to whip the chewing links off of it. Greetings, you prick. Just calm down and stop that. You accelerate the encroachment process the more you panic, and you'll become something worse than a monster when the process is finished. After almost being struck in the head by the flailing chain, the female Reaper yelled, in which Naruto immediately dropped the chain and raised his arms in the air. The cannibalistic chain links slowed their pace, but they still chewed much more slowly. The pig-tailed girl said, "All right, let's try this again in a more composed way. I'm sorry to tell you, kid, but you're actually dead. It is demonstrated by the encroaching chain of fate that is fastened to your chest, and just look at your bleeding body behind you for additional evidence." But I've come close to death a lot of times before, like when that traitor Kabuto tried to make mincemeat out of my heart, Naruto said, casting a quick glance back at his own corpse before returning his focus to the female Shinigami. How can you be certain that I've passed away? It's possible that the damned fox is waiting on me to give me a lesson. Your chain is to blame. You cannot go back to your body because it has already been severed, even though it wouldn't have helped you. Furthermore, even a demon like Kyuubi no Kitsune couldn't heal the wound you had sustained, she responded. Yes, but hold on, tell me about the Kyuubi. The girl winced at this. Well, nobody in Seirei is unaware that one of us has sealed something as strong and chaotic as the Kyuubi no Kitsune into a human infant. The fact that a human made contact with a Shinigami made it even more remarkable. Do you know who exactly sealed that damn demon into me, or why I'm unable to sense it the way I usually do? Hopefully, Naruto asked. You can't say that, kid, the girl said, simply shaking her head regarding your second query. However, I would presume that it was related to the seal that trapped the beast inside of you. Of course. The 8 trigrams seal, Naruto thought, recalling the first time he had ever seen the fox in person, when Jiraiya had flung him over a deep gorge so he could more easily access the power of his bijou. The fox himself stated that if his host died, he would also perish. Look, youngster, playing 20 questions isn't really in our schedule. I need to take you to Soul Society right now, the enigmatic girl said. But you can't. Desperately, Naruto cried out, I've finally found something to live for. I still have to fulfill all of my promises and become Hokage. TCH, I personally don't see why you have to put in so much effort in keeping any promise you made to those two-faced ingrates, the girl grumbled. Hey, don't use that name for my friends. With a swift rise in indignation, Naruto yelled, what do you know about my life anyway? The girl calmly responded, more than you know, Naruto Uzumaki. Observing the shocked look on her charge's face, she went on, I checked your background while I was trying to find you and I must admit, I'm shocked that you genuinely wish to return to your former life. I would have left your village long ago if I were in your shoes, unless you're a masochist who relishes being denigrated and treated like trash by everyone. Hey, it wasn't so horrible. A small percentage of the villagers accepted me, even though the majority detested me and thought I was the fox demon's reincarnation. Oh, I see, give them names. Well, there's the old man and my old academy sensei, Iruka Amino for starters, started Naruto. Your old man was in charge of the entire village and had plenty of work ahead of him. Why didn't he take more drastic measures to ensure that you had a better upbringing if he truly cared about you? He does the bare minimum for you, as evidenced by the fact that he gave you your own subpar apartment after you were expelled from the orphanage. As for Mr. Sea Dolphin, he essentially treated you with the same icy indifference as everyone else until his treacherous comrade almost killed him, she countered. You have no right to say that. That is untrue. When I was younger and everyone else was treating me badly, they looked out for me, Naruto snarled, which accelerated the encroachment. All right. I apologize and retracted, slowing down the encroachment process once more, the girl said placatingly. They did care about you. Are there any others? Indeed, Tuichi and Ayame from Ichiraku's ramen bar are present. They treated me well at all times. Okay, that's 4 people. Grandma Tsunade and Pervy Sage were kind to me. For the most part both Bushy Brow's team and the Rookie 9 from my class are present. The girl interrupted. Okay, now hold up for a minute. How can you say that? Because you and I both know that's not totally accurate. Well, so I didn't really get along with Neji, Tenten, Ino, or that Shino guy, but I'm on reasonable terms with everybody else, especially with my T. Naruto looked at her before continuing. I've witnessed a number of cases of delusion, but yours, kid, is by far the worst I've ever seen. The Shinigami said sharply. Stop right there. What is the intended meaning of that? I've always found Hinata to be kind and amiable. She never once insulted me, even though she always behaved strangely around me. Furthermore, Bushy Brows is a good man despite being a little difficult to understand. Right, so that leaves you with a testosterone drunk jerk who constantly insulted and put you down so that he could think that he was the alpha male. A violent food-addicted fatso that saw as an annoying pest, and lazy know-it-all that always spoke to you as if you were a mindless idiot. Alright, you're just exaggerating now. Even though Shikamaru, Kiba, and Choji occasionally behaved in such a manner, they were always around me when I was in the academy. I was friends with them. Really, after the academy was shut down, how many times did they invite you to hang out with them? Have they ever asked you to visit their homes? Did they ever spend any time getting to know you? Naruto tried to think of a counter-argument, but he was at a loss. Thinking back to his time at the academy, he realized, grudgingly, that the girl was correct. They did not really hang out with each other outside of class. Whenever he saw them with their parents, they would ignore him as if he were not there, and when he attempted to approach them to say, hello, their parents would either give him a hateful glare or tell him to get lost. Well, they were still with me, Naruto countered. Just because they don't live up to your expectations doesn't mean that they aren't worthy of being anyone else's friend, much less mine. Alright, who am I to tell you what kind of friends you should have? Furthermore, they were far superior to your sensei and so-called teammates when everything was taken into account. Hey, don't begin disparaging my. Avoid completing that sentence. You didn't have a team at all. In fact, your team would appear if you searched for team in a thesaurus antonym section. Now what on earth are you talking about? One of the greatest teams Konohagakure had to offer was mine, Naruto cried out. Incredulous, the Shinigami simply sneered. TCH, if that was your village's best, then I fear for your village's future. What was that? I want to let you know that Kakashi-sensei is among the top ninjas in the world. Alright. He's not necessarily a good teacher just because he's a good shinobi. In addition, he has taught you incredibly poorly throughout your entire time with your team. That is untrue. He was an excellent instructor, on the defensive, Naruto said. Oh really? Name one time that he personally taught or trained you. Well, he taught me the tree walking exercise and team tactics, began Naruto. Yes, certainly, that's all well and good, but did he ever give you any one-on-one instruction or even advice? The Chunin exams, perhaps? Did he even make an effort to help you get ready for your game? Did Uchiha even bother to take you seriously during the exam when you had crucial information about him? Even though it all worked out for him in the end, it still hurt that Kakashi chose to train Sasuke over him, and the fact that he never once took him seriously about the whole Gaara incident, along with the fact that he had just been traded off to an instructor who harbored resentment toward him, left Naruto feeling bitter about his teacher. He was also left with only chakra control exercises to practice, which only made him more resentful of his teacher. As though reading the ex-shinobi's thoughts, the Shinigami said, and don't even get me started on that prick, Sasuke. I'll never know what your village and almost all of the women in your old village saw in him. In my opinion, rather than attempting to drag that traitor back to your village, you ought to have concentrated on killing him. You know, Sasuke was one of the few individuals I could identify with. I never had a brother like him. The Reaper laughed incredulously at this. Your brother? The majority of your so-called brother's time was spent disparaging you in order to support his conceit. Despite having the entire village eating out of his palm, he never once expressed gratitude to them for the sole purpose of learning some high-power techniques from a traitor. He also stabbed the entire village in the back, and to top it all off, he tried to kill you several times before he was successful. I understand that a person's first love is unique and can make them act foolish, but this is... I'm not gay, Naruto interrupted. Really? How would you then describe your initial kiss during? It wasn't deliberate. All that happened was an accident. I was just staring him down when some bastard knocked me off balance and I fell on him, yelled Naruto angrily. If I had the chance, I would have clobbered the jerk who brought about that nightmare. Alright, I didn't mean it that way, but why are you allowing Sasuke so much leeway if he isn't your lover, particularly considering that he killed you? Particularly since the day you began working with your team. He has never shown you any respect as a comrade. Once more, Naruto was at a loss for words. Sasuke was never a pleasant person to be around. No matter how hard he tried or how much he trained, he always seemed to outdo him, and every time he did, the bloody Uchiha seemed to enjoy rubbing it in his face. He secretly wished that he could just switch lives with Sasuke because he always envied how everyone seemed to respect and accept him automatically, and he tried desperately to better himself so that he would no longer be in Sasuke's shadow. However, whenever he succeeded in outperforming Sasuke in any way, the Uchiha became determined to beat him down again or try to outdo him. And last but not least, there's that shallow, self-centered, pinky-haired, howler monkey of a bitch. The Shinigami responded. No, you have no right to say that about Sakura. Why shouldn't I? Why should I say anything nice about her when she never said anything nice about you? More significantly, though, why did you endure the abuse for so long? What are you doing? She never mistreated me. Defensively, Naruto denied. Is that correct? So you're saying that she expressed her love for you by hitting you whenever you were nice to her, when she criticized her precious Sasuke-kun, or for any other reason she thought appropriate? Whoa, I apologize. I didn't know. The girl answered, her voice practically brimming with sarcasm. Shut up. It wasn't like that at all, she said. Naruto yelled, his voice wavering just enough to be heard. What the devil is wrong with you? For heaven's sake. She never gave you the time of day, so why are you so defensive with her? With her tolerance for blondes almost at its breaking point, the Shinigami growled, Criminy, how stupid are you? Naruto yelled, what the hell are you talking about? I'm not ignorant. If you thought that you had a chance with that shallow, pink-haired, flat-chested bitch, then you clearly are ignorant. The fact that you're still crushing on that selfish brat just shows how much you're lost in your own world. No matter how nice you were to her, and no matter how many times you've asked her out, she still preferred to be shot down by that Uchiha traitor. That right there should have been enough proof for you to realize that the girl was a lost cause. You take that back. You don't know Sakura-chan like I do. I know that she hardly ever contributes to the team when you're out on the mission, and still criticizes you every little thing that you do. I know that she always takes Sasuke's side whenever you have an argument with that prick, and I also know that she becomes incredibly desperate whenever something or someone friends said prick. In which case she does something extremely stupid that would endanger herself and everyone else around her. Why are you so dead set on making this girl like you? Because she went through the same problems that I did when she was still a kid. She didn't have many friends, she was being picked on bullies, and she always felt lonely. So, I take it you tried to help her out? Naruto was polite enough to blush at that remark and scratch the back of his head at the same time. Well, I did sort get back at those bullies, and I tried to talk to her once, but I'm going to assume that she was already hanging out with that other stupid cow who loved Uchiha. What's her name? It must have something to do with sows, or pigs. Ino. That's it. Sakura's attitude changed completely after she became friends with Ino Yamanaka, and she immediately began acting like all the other girls in the academy. Naruto remained silent, his head apparently fixed on the ground. It was all too true. She took it as an affirmative response because she didn't get a response from the soul, which only made her turn her nose up in disgust. Hey. That just proves that she was never worth all the time you spent pining over her, she said. All you quit? You have no right to make such disparaging remarks about Sakura-chan, she's much nicer. Since when? Since when has your beloved Sakura-chan ever treated you kindly? The Reaper interrupted, her patience with the blonde with the whiskers finally giving way to her annoyance. You were never given the opportunity to date her at all. She was never nice to you, she never missed an opportunity to hit or insult you. And she never complimented you when you did something she couldn't. She didn't even express gratitude to you for saving her life, which she assumed was saved by Sasuke, the ninja who was completely helpless against that bloodthirsty Suna kid. And if that wasn't enough for you, she even had the audacity to implore you to bring her Sasuke back while crying. She didn't care if you or any of your teammates survived. She specifically used you to win back her Prince Charming. All throughout the Reaper's tongue lashing, Naruto tried frantically to come up with a refute to her argument. Anything to stop her from going on, but try as he might, he just couldn't do it. The years of denial and self-delusion were finally catching up to him, overwhelming him with a torrent of emotions he had been holding back. Confusion, despair, hopelessness, frustration, but most of all, anger. 13 years of repressed rage began to flow all over his body, like lava flowing from an erupting volcano. And it wasn't the anger he would usually show around in public, but the deep-seated kind that he felt ever since he was kid. He was angry at the Yondaime Hokage for sealing the Kyuubi inside of him. He hated that he was always targeted because of the Kyuubi. He was angry that the villagers, shinobi and civilian, never took time to actually get to know him. Instead, seeing him as the Kyuubi reincarnated, he hated that he had worked his fingers to the bone just to get the things that his peers often took for granted. He hated that his own teammates used him as fodder for their jokes, and always looked down at him as the lowest standard, and, most importantly, he was angry with himself for letting his life continue to degrade to such a sad state. "It's time to face facts, bucko," the Shinigami said, ignoring the internal conflict that was going on inside Naruto's head. "Your sensei was a hypocrite who was hypocritical, indolent, and partial. Your brother was a power-hungry, conceited, and callous traitor, and your supposed crush was a worthless, materialistic, untalented whore who tarnished the reputation of women in Kunoichi worldwide." "Fuck you," was Naruto's icy, disinterested response. It took a moment for the Shinigami to realize that it was a freaking plus that said that to her, but even though she had heard that phrase hundreds of times before, she had never heard it in that way, and it made her think of someone who was going to kill her already. She felt her resolve to not hurt the boy in front of her deteriorate quickly. "What have you said to me recently?" She spoke in a tone that promised unspeakable suffering. "I said, fuck you, you fucking Shinigami bitch, fuck you." The Reaper gasped at the sight of Naruto's eyes, which were different from those she had ever seen in a plus or a hollow. The sclera was a deep blood red, while the corneas remained blue. But it was the pupils that began to unnerve her, as they had feral slits in place of the usual circular pattern she saw in both pluses and hollows, sending shivers down her spine. However, that was nothing compared to the sudden flood of Ryotsu flowing off Naruto in a violent mixture of black and red, which slowly started to condense and take the shape of some large animal. "You fucking Shinigami are to blame for my life's chaos. I was cursed to be the village's scapegoat for life because it was you who sealed the Kyuubi inside of me. I was subjected to ongoing discrimination and prejudice because of your kindness for something I couldn't control. I had to put in endless effort to try and salvage the jumbled life I was given. I had to constantly battle tooth and nail to be accepted by my peers as a normal person. And now you criticize the living daylights out of me and tell me that I must leave it behind after I've finally made some progress in bettering my life? Fuck you, all you Shinigami bastards, fuck you. I am aware of how hectic my life was. I'm aware that it could have been better, but damn it, it was all I had." The Ryotsu condensed on itself even more, and Naruto yelled, until the Shinigami saw that it looked like a big fox, with enormous, sharp teeth and 9 long tails that were thrashing around as if they had a mind of their own. The sight was so terrifying that the young Shinigami nearly missed the soul's chain starting to encroach like a school piranhas going on a feeding frenzy on an obese cow. Any moment now, the chain would be completely corroded, and the boy would become a hollow, and based on the amount of Ryotsu this soul was producing, she really didn't want to fight it when it turned into a hollow, and she would get into a lot of trouble with her superiors for inciting a plus into corrupting itself. "All right, I apologize. I apologize for being so direct, but I wasn't in the mood to go on this mission because I've had a really rough day. I was merely attempting to assist you in passing away, and I didn't mean to upset you." Desperate to soothe the young boy, she said. Go on. Go on. I want to pass on, but why the hell would I want to? I want my former life to return? But I'm not capable of that. It's too late already. Avoid giving me that crap. You're telling me that you can't do something as basic as prolonging a human's life when your kind conceal giant, malevolent demons that have the power to transform the world's landscapes into human beings? I'm not capable of that. The soul cannot be brought back into the body. Your chain of fate has already been broken. To enter the Soul Society, you must allow me to perform the Konso on you. Soul Society? Do you all call that oblivion? Describe a compelling argument for why I should even consider letting you take me to that fucking location. Only roughly 1/3 of the chain was left at this point. Because if you stay here, you'll turn into a hollow, a monster that consumes living people's souls. You will be condemned to a life of misery, suffering, and never-ending hunger once that chain is removed. And I don't think you would want to endure more agony for eternity after everything you endured while you were alive, the Shinigami yelled. After concluding that he would not attack her, the Shinigami approached the dead youth, but when she got the boy, she saw that his body was trembling and that there were small damp spots on the ground right underneath where his eyes would be. Then she heard the barely contained sobs. Naruto's exhaustion finally caught up with him, and he collapsed to the ground, the overbearing Ryotsu starting to recede until nothing remained, leaving the plus hunched over on his hands and knees, his face looking at the ground below, and the chain of fate slowly encroaching towards the center of the boy's chest. So, what are you holding out for? Just move quickly and finish it. Just do it and spare me the suspense if I'm going to be sent to this Soul Society, purgatory, or hell, choked Naruto. The Reaper cupped Naruto's chin with her hand, feeling a fresh wave of sympathy for the young dead, and slowly raised his face, which had tears streaming down his cheeks. To hers, Naruto then saw the face of the female Shinigami, which was not cold or spiteful like he had read in the old history books, but rather kind and understanding, which made it even more perplexing given the girl's previous actions. "The Soul Society isn't as horrible as you believe it to be," she said quietly, adding, "I never said that you were going to hell. Actually, it's a lot like your village without anyone criticizing you for something you didn't do. You'll be able to live in peace. It will be similar to being given another opportunity to lead a fulfilling life." In a barely audible whisper, Naruto said, but, I'm scared. I'm afraid to see what's on the other side. I fear that everything will be exactly as it was during my lifetime." The Shinigami smiled softly and said, "It's okay to feel scared when it's time to leave. Everyone is terrified. I understand that it's difficult to let go, but staying here would only hurt you and everyone else." Once again, Naruto fell silent as he thought of all the people he did care about and who he knew genuinely cared about him. He didn't want to leave them all behind, but he also didn't want to stay and risk hurting them. But one thought kept coming to mind. "Will it hurt at all, I wonder?" quietly, Naruto asked. She gave a little laugh at this. "Not at all, as long as you haven't committed any crimes or sins against nature. It is completely painless." She then pulled her katana from its scabbard, causing the blonde boy to flinch. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you," she said reassuringly before switching her blade into a reverse grip. "And before you ask, that excludes you keeping the Kyuubi at bay." "Hold on. Could you at least tell me your name before you send me away?" Naruto inquired. The Reaper was taken aback for a moment by the question. Not many souls inquired for her name. Maybe this soul wasn't entirely bothersome. She soon recovered her composure and let a grin appear on her face. "Hiyori. You know, it's customary for a guy to give a girl his name once she gives you hers," she said calmly, introducing herself as Hiyori Sarugaki, lieutenant of the 12th Division. With a smirk of his own, Naruto simply had to say, "It's Naruto Uzumaki, monkey brat." It seemed as though his former self was starting to come back to life. With a tick visible on her forehead, she said, "You're so lucky that I need to get you to the Soul Society." Then, using the pommel of her sword, she gently jabbed Naruto in the forehead, leaving behind a approved kanji. Immediately, Naruto felt a calm and overwhelming sensation as his entire body started to glow with bright blue-white light. After that, he slowly started to sink into the ground, leaving behind a black butterfly that fluttered off to the sky. "Yo, it's Sarugaki," Hiyori said, taking a cell phone out of her pocket and pressing a button to call her superiors after realizing her task was gone. "I had reached him before any hollows could reach him, so yes, the plus has been taken care of," she said. This particular person was able to use Ryotsu without even realizing it, which was fortunate. Hell, it could even manifest itself in a visible way. How did it appear? I don't know, it kind of resembled a multi-tailed wolf. But wait, it was actually a fox indeed. It was a fox, however. It had 9 tails rather than 1. "Hey, could you please open the gate so I can go home? You can read my report if this plus really interests you." A large sliding door appeared out of thin air just moments after she severed the connection, and when it opened, it revealed a blinding white light, but this did not stop Hiyori from entering through it before it eventually faded out of existence, leaving behind only the bleeding body of what had once been one Naruto Uzumaki. The scene remained in this state for almost 5 minutes before Kakashi and his ninkenpokun arrived, and Kakashi just stood there, stunned, as he tried to convince himself that the rain was causing him to see things, but he knew that was wishful thinking. Pakun trotted over to the headband that was lying on the ground as he slowly approached the body. After sniffing it a few times, the dog declared, "It's Sasuke's. The rain was removing his scent. I can no longer find him." Kakashi remained silent the entire time, just staring at what used to be his hyperactive student, the dead last of the academy, the legacy of the Yondaime Hokage. The very sight of Naruto made Kakashi think back to when he first began as the Jonin sensei for Team 7. Before he passed the team, he had told his students that he believed that those who broke the rules were trash, but those who abandoned their comrades were lower than trash. But upon retrospect, he realized that he didn't really follow his own teachings. He was lazy when it came to training his students, thinking that he was actually giving them their own space to hone their own skills. And whenever he did take an interest in training with them, he only taught his students teamwork exercises, but never really bothered to stop them whenever they fell apart. To make matters worse, he would constantly spend extra time to help Sasuke after their usual team meetings, but didn't extend the same courtesy to Naruto or Sakura. Heck, he even opted to train Sasuke for the Chunin exams over Naruto, and just passed him off to another Jonin so that he wouldn't have to worry about it. It spoke volumes as to how he had failed as an instructor, and Naruto paid the ultimate price for his lack of actions. "What are you going to do?" Kakashi. Pakun questioned this as he watched his summoner gently lift Naruto's body into his arms before he went to get the abandoned headband. He responded solemnly, "Let's go back home, Pakun, and report this to the Hokage." "How about Sasuke, though? Are you certain that?" "Yes, Pakun. Sasuke has already crossed the border, and the rain is erasing his scent," Kakashi said, interrupting a little harsher than he meant to. "It will be almost impossible to track him down." The little Ninken, who knew what Kakashi was thinking, simply followed his master home, saying only, "Right," before he and Kakashi leapt off towards Konoha. A minute later, something slowly rose from the ground, resembling a Venus flytrap-like plant, except that it had a red clouded black cloak, a green-haired head, arms, and legs. The most striking aspect of the humanoid plant man was its face, which was made up of two colors that met at the center. A dark black on the right side and a white one on the left. Oddly, only the white side appeared to be human, as half of a mouth and a bright yellow eye were visible, while the black side appeared to be devoid of all human features except for a beady yellow eye that showed no cornea or sclera. "What an asshole!" A voice that sounded like it came from the black half said, "It seems like you can always count on the Uchiha clan's runt to ruin things." A different, softer, calmer voice seemingly from the left side said, "Indeed. The leader will want to hear of this immediately." Hospital in Konoha. The medical staff was all abuzz when the members of the Uchiha Retrieval team were brought back. Whilst Shikamaru and Kiba's injuries weren't serious, Neji and Choji needed immediate attention. The Akamichi heir's body was dangerously atrophied, and was suffering the side effects of using his clan's special brand of soldier rations pellets, the three-colored pills. Neji, on the other hand, had multiple stab wounds, as well as two gaping holes that were caused by his opponent's high-powered arrows. Even though the hospital had Tsunade and Shizun's medical expertise to help them, the severity of the wounds still kept them busy. Kiba and his partner, Akamaru, weren't in life-threatening danger, but they were going to be out of commission for a while. Surprisingly, Shikamaru had only a few scraps and bruises, a broken finger, and mild chakra exhaustion to show for his part in the mission, and was thus treated fairly quickly. Rock Lee, a newly healed ninja that had volunteered his services to the team, was just suffering from some pulled muscles and exhaustion. Currently, the young Nara was sitting in the corridor that branched off to the two operating rooms that Neji and Choji were currently occupying. Across from him was Temari, one of the three shinobi from Sanagakure that answered the Hokage's request for backup. It was thanks to her team that Kiba, Lee, and himself managed to make it back without receiving any more grievous injuries. But that wasn't what troubled Shikamaru from the moment he reached the hospital. His mind had been replaying everything that went wrong on the mission. He had known that it was going to be troublesome, but he had never expected this much trouble. The ninja that had escorted Sasuke to Otogakure were something else, almost like something out of a horror movie. Every time one of his comrades stayed to fight an Auto Nin so that the team could continue their pursuit, he couldn't stop himself from thinking that he had sent one of his friends to their death. After Choji and Neji had stayed behind, and they had managed to successfully get Sasuke away from his escort team, he briefly thought they had a sliver of a chance at succeeding. But it all went downhill when Kiba and Akamaru got caught in the explosion from the explosive note that they had planted to cover their escape. They weren't hurt by the explosion, but the shockwave had thrown them, and the lipstick-wearing Auto Nin over the ravine. Subsequently, another Auto Nin came out of nowhere, and had reacquired Sasuke before running back towards the borderline. Realizing that Naruto's abilities were more adept for combat, he acted as a diversion so that Naruto could continue on. From that point on, the battle was anything but easy for him. The Kunoichi was as vicious and bloodthirsty as all the other Auto Nin he had faced, but she used strategy, genjutsu, and a trio of blind ogre-like monsters to fight, while her teammates focused on brute strength and heavy-hitting jutsu. The battle had forced him to use every trick he knew, but it wasn't enough to completely incapacitate her. However, when it appeared that he was about to die, that troublesome fan-wielding Kunoichi appeared out of nowhere and blew the enemy away with ease. Her approach to her opponent reminded him of his mother, not that he wasn't grateful for Temari's assistance. "Hey, Pineapple Head, stop brooding over what happened out on the field." It seems that she also possessed the same ability to read minds. "What was that?" Shikamaru inquired. "I said, stop wasting time brooding over what happened during the mission," Temari reiterated. "From what I heard, you and your friends were in way over your heads." Shikamaru concurred, saying, "I knew from the beginning that we were up against ninja who were completely superior to us all. Nevertheless, I sent my friends, men I had known since I was a young child, to battle against adversaries I knew they had little chance of winning. I treated them like pawns in a shogi game, despite the fact that they were real people with unique personalities, aspirations, and goals. That's one way to put it. The leaders sometimes have to do that, whether they like it or not. While it's admirable to care about your team's well-being, there are instances in which completing the mission comes before all other considerations. Temari crossed her legs as she spoke. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Shikamaru said, getting up with a HMPH, and leaving the waiting room, leaving Temari perplexed. "I'm stepping down as a shinobi. The stress and responsibilities of this rank are too much for me to handle, to be honest. I had no intention of becoming a chunin. Furthermore, considering how poorly this mission went, I don't think I'll be able to stay a chunin for very long." Shikamaru started to leave, saying, "It's just too troublesome to deal with." With an unladylike snort, Temari retorted, "I never thought you were such a whiner." She hoped that the young Nara would return, or that his personality would return to when he was battling her during the chunin exams. "Yeah, I knew that you were a quitter, but I thought that you would at least be man enough to weather out being a chunin for a while, before you decide that you're not ready for the responsibilities," she said. "Well, I suppose I'm not who you believe me to be." In a defeated tone, Shikamaru responded, "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's life. It's full of disappointments." The Greenhorn Chunin was heading toward the Shinobi Registry building when he passed a hallway intersection and noticed his father leaning against a wall that was perpendicular to the path he was taking. "Will you simply allow a girl to speak to you in such a condescending manner?" With his eyes still shut, he drew lead. "I suppose you're not truly a man after all?" Shikamaru stopped dead in his tracks when he realized that his father was there and listening in on his conversation with Temari. "It's too troublesome to deal with right now," he said. "Furthermore, I don't really need to worry about acting unmanly because I'm still a child." "Yes, given your present demeanor, you can't truly call yourself a man. You believe that you have the right to abandon everything because your first chunin mission didn't work out? You were trusted to guide them to the best of your abilities by your fellow soldiers. When they left the village gates, they were already aware of the dangers they would face. They followed you despite knowing the dangers they would probably face during the mission, and now you're complaining about how everything went wrong, as though you have the right to claim that they fought a pointless battle. Did you ever consider how your fellow soldiers might respond if they learned that you wanted to leave after just one unsuccessful mission? Will you allow all of their sacrifices and hard work to be in vain? Okay?" Shikamaru simply stood there, unresponsive and silent. His normally easygoing father's words had a profound effect on him, causing him to reevaluate his decision. While Kiba and Naruto would never have allowed him to hear the end of his decision to leave active service, he couldn't in good conscience continue on as a shinobi knowing that he was responsible for Neji and Choji's serious injuries. If they were permanently disabled or worse, died from their wounds, how could he possibly lead anyone else? The door to Choji's operating room opened at that moment, and Shikamaru turned to see Tsunade leaving. "There's nothing to worry about anymore," she said, sending the young Nara a reassuring smile as though she could sense what was going through his mind. "He was in critical condition, but we were able to stop the side effects of the Akamichi's 3 colored pills, thanks to the deer antlers that your clan provided." "Shikaku," she said reassuringly as she sat on the bench, "Choji Akamichi is going to be alright." Shikaku calmly replied, "Hey, it's always a pleasure to help the village, whether it's out in the field or in the hospital. Lady Hokage." Shikaku then glanced at his son, who appeared to be in some sort of shock that his best friend would actually be okay based on his previous actions. Shikaku could tell that Shikamaru was anticipating the worst. Shizune emerged from the operation room where Neji was being held as the door suddenly opened. She was panting a little and had perspiration on her forehead, but she still looked victorious. "Neji Hyuga's operation is a success," Shizune said. "He is no longer in critical condition after receiving treatment for his fatal injuries. However, for him to fully recover, he will need to be removed from active duty." Shikamaru simply stood there, silently absorbing all the status updates of his squad's severely wounded members. Based on what he had witnessed upon returning to the hospital, Choji and Neji's injuries were fatal, and their deaths were imminent, but somehow they survived. Shikamaru attempted to maintain hope that everything would be okay, but there was still one terrible outcome that tormented him relentlessly. "Has Naruto been mentioned?" Tsunade asked, trying to hide her anxiety behind her composed public persona. One of the medic nins sent to recover fallen shinobi approached the group just as Shizune was about to respond to her mentor. He immediately caught everyone's attention by saying, "Lady Hokage, Jonin Kakashi Hitaki has just returned." The room fell quickly silent as everyone attempted to process what had been ceremoniously placed on their laps. "He's brought back the body of Genin Naruto Uzumaki," he added solemnly. His physique? Are you saying that?" Temari began. According to the medic, Naruto Uzumaki's fatal wounds are consistent with those that the Chidori are known to inflict. Naruto Uzumaki is dead. In addition to confirming this theory, Hitaki claimed that Sasuke Uchiha was the one who executed the jutsu. Although Shizune was shocked, she turned to see how her mentor would respond, knowing that the older woman had begun to view the younger blonde as a surrogate son. As she looked at the Hokage, the young medic Nin could see that the news was tearing her up inside. Even though it seemed like Tsunade was calm and serious, it was simply too ridiculous to believe what they had just heard, as if the entire world was about to blow up in the next 24 hours. Lady Su. Shizune, the Hokage said abruptly, interrupting her apprentice, I want you to remain here and oversee the medical teams that are treating the two genins. If you see any indications of trouble, let me know. Before Shizune could respond, Tsunade left with the medic Nin to see Kakashi for his report and to examine Naruto's body in accordance with protocol for any Leaf shinobi who died on a mission. We already lost one shinobi from this damn mission, and I will not lose any more of our soldiers. The room was filled with a tense silence, with no one daring to speak, until Shikamaru collapsed to his knees, then leaned forward and landed on his hands. His body trembled as he repressed the sobs that were trying to escape, knowing that it was unmanly to be seen crying in front of everyone and that a shinobi should have better control over his emotions, but he was powerless to stop the tears that began to spill from his clenched eyes. The hard truth was that the once hyperactive, loud blonde was no longer alive, that his old classmate, fellow member of the Four Losers, his comrade. In a strained voice, he declared, I've only been a Chunin for a month, and already I've killed one of my teammates, and on my first mission as leader too. This is all my fault. Despite his clipped tone, Shikamaru's emotions were in turmoil as he spoke. It's not your fault, Tamari said, her voice low enough for only he to hear. You and your friends were up against shinobi that could easily take down two veteran jonin without sustaining injuries. This was one of the few times Tamari showed kindness by lowering herself next to the distraught Nara and giving him a tender hug. You did the best you could. Newly promoted Chunin are never expected to be prepared for missions like that. Yes, but I didn't do my best to ensure everyone's survival. Regardless of the mission, it was my responsibility as leader to ensure that my teammates survived. I can't even do that correctly, though. If only I tried harder, if only I hadn't separated the team, then maybe we could have. Shikamaru struggled to finish his sentence, trying to control the tears that were already streaming down his cheeks. Tamari, who usually wore an abrasive and harsh demeanor in the field, chose not to make fun of him for his lack of composure because she knew that losing a comrade you've known since childhood was the most devastating thing that can happen. This was especially true given that the comrade was the one child who had single-handedly defeated her youngest brother and helped him change for the better. Shikaku said nothing as he watched the interaction between his son and the Suna Kunoichi from afar. Whilst he didn't show it, he too felt remorse for what his son was going through. He knew that Shikamaru would have had to deal with his comrades dying sometime during his time a shinobi, but he had hoped that it wouldn't have been so soon, preferably when he had a few years of experience under his belt. As for Naruto's death, well, he didn't know what to think. Even though he didn't actively despise the boy for what he contained, he did try to keep his son's interaction with him as minimum as he could in order to protect him from the civilians and other shinobi. He could tell that things were starting to look up for the Jinchuriki, as he watched how Blonde was slowly gaining trust amongst the populace. But as the Jonin commander for his village, he realized that Naruto's death would be seen as a sign of vulnerability. With their only Jinchuriki gone, their enemies might even see it as the right chance to strike and further weaken their village. In contrast, Shizune simply walked to Choji's room with a single tear streaming down her cheek because she couldn't stand waiting in the waiting room and decided to follow her master's instructions in the hopes that it would divert her attention from the fate of the boy she had begun to view as a younger brother. At an unknown place with Naruto, the very first thing that Naruto noticed once he had regained his bearings was that he was staring up at a bleary gray sky. The second thing was that he laying flat on his back on the hard, unforgiving surface of the earth and ground. As he slowly sat up, he saw that he was laying in the middle of the street to some city that he was unfamiliar with. The designs of the buildings were familiar to some of the buildings that he had seen around Konoha, only they seemed a bit more worn down than the ones he was used to. Some of them looked as if they were about to be demolished, if the broken windows and weathered walls were anything to go by. Looking around himself, Naruto saw a few shops set up on both sides of the street, selling products ranging from food and clothes, to jewelry and other trinkets that Naruto never truly cared about. A few people walked past him, going past him in both directions. Some were dressed in normal clothes while others were wearing what looked to be rags. It wasn't until a passerby's shoulder nudged into him that Naruto realized his surroundings weren't the only things that had changed since he had been whisked away from the land of the living. His battered and ruined orange jumpsuit was gone, replaced by a plain white kimono, and he noticed that he was wearing a pair of Zori sandals with white tabi socks instead of his usual blue shinobi sandals, and that his shuriken and kunai holster were still strapped to his right thigh. I'm fairly certain that Monkey Brad didn't mention getting new clothes automatically when you get into Soul Society, and I had expected Soul Society to be a little nicer than this. Everything looks so run down here, almost like the Land of Waves when Gato was still in control. Okay, this is just weird, Naruto thought as he shuffled around to get a better feel for the strange clothes he was now wearing. As he looked around, he noticed that there were very few people around. It was as though he was in a ghost town thinking he had nothing to lose. Naruto approached the merchant who was running a jewelry stand nearby. Assuming the man would know where he was as he approached, he noticed that the man had a large gut and a drastically receding hairline. Excuse me, sir, he began. Hi, I'm a bit lost and IW. You cretin, fuck off, I don't associate myself with new arrivals like you, the man said. For a moment, Naruto was taken aback by the man's blatant rudeness. He didn't even know him, but he was being treated as though he had broken into his house. I'm sorry, is something wrong? The blonde inquired. The man sneered, yeah, just standing there is holding up business, there is something wrong. If some poor newcomer like you keeps looking around, I won't be able to sell my goods, and I'm trying to turn a profit so that I don't have to move out of my apartment now. I advise you to leave this place immediately unless you plan to purchase something. But all I need are instructions, all I want to know is, Naruto said. Hey, scumbag. Move aside. A new voice called out behind him, and he turned to see a garish woman with wrinkles around her eyes, a faded and wrinkled gown, and a dirty feather boa. Two other women wearing similar clothing, but appearing to be a few years older than the woman in front of them, were standing behind her. You dumb fool, are you deaf? Move out of our way, she said arrogantly. Honestly, high-class socialites like us shouldn't have to deal with lowbrow trash like you. Then she opened a fan and started fanning herself, and her followers quickly followed suit. You ugly hag, what did you just say to me? He had only just arrived at this Soul Society or whatever this place was called, and already he was starting to feel as though he was still in Konoha. Snarled Naruto, his patience already on the verge of breaking. All he wanted was some damn directions. How dare you talk to us like that? You have no right to be seen by us, much less speak to us, the lead woman yelled. Now leave this place before I call the police to put you out of here, she said smugly. Naruto was very tempted to open a can of whoop ass on the conceited woman in front of him because of the way she spoke to him. He wanted to hurt her badly, but his conscience kept telling him that this would only lead to more problems down the road. Plus he was new to this area and there was a chance that the woman in front of him, no matter how unpleasant, actually had the authority to order the authorities to arrest him. With great reluctance, Naruto simply left the merchant and the three ugly women, using all of his self-control not to attack them when he saw their smug looks. That's correct. Go back to whatever dump you crawled out of, she said in a haughty, conceited tone. Naruto thought gloomily, I'll remember this, you old, wrinkly bitch, already suspicious of people, souls, whatever they were. The blonde decided that it would be better to wander the street aimlessly, trying to figure out where he was alone. He did not die to be placed in an afterlife that was similar to the life he had had before. After a while, as he surveyed the now apparently deserted area, Naruto thought, well, maybe going off on my own without asking anyone where I am wasn't my best idea. He had been wandering for a while and still didn't know where he was, and he had assumed that somewhere along the way he would have found something or someone who could tell him exactly where he was. But as luck would have it for the blonde, he came up with nothing, and the people he did ask for assistance were either too busy to notice him or were only willing to provide him with information that didn't really explain anything to him. To date, he had discovered that he was in Rukanagi, specifically District Number 64, the North Alley of Wandering Spirits. Well, isn't that ironic? I'm blindly wandering around in a district named after wandering spirits. Where the hell is Rukanagi? I thought I was supposed to be sent to Soul Society, not the District for Lost Spirits. Man, I've been dead for barely a day, and I've already been royally screwed over. I should have known better than to trust that Shinigami bitch, monkey brat. I should have just kicked her in tea. Naruto's inner rage was interrupted when he caught sight of something he had seen multiple times in his life and had even experienced once or twice. A girl of about his age was standing in front of him. She had strawberry blonde hair that reached her neck, but what really caught Naruto's eye was the soiled and torn clothes she was wearing. To make matters worse, she appeared to be in excruciating pain, as evidenced by the way she was swaying from side to side while walking slowly and clutching at her stomach, as if it were taking all of her strength to simply walk. The last straw for Naruto was when he saw her finally fall to the ground, but no one stopped to check on her, as if the incident were normal. Fearing the worst, Naruto hurried to the girl who was lying on the ground, putting aside any thoughts of where he was to focus on examining her for any serious injuries. After a quick search that yielded nothing, Naruto carefully turned her over so that he could see her face, but when he did, he saw a pair of pale, sky-blue eyes that seemed to be nearly lifeless, and the dirt smudges that covered her face suggested that she had lived in extreme poverty for a long time. "Hey, hello, young one, are you okay? Talk to me, please." He had sensed something like a pulse from her earlier, but he was still worried that the girl's condition might worsen. Fortunately, it appeared that the mysterious girl was still alive, as her eyes locked onto Naruto's, and her lips made tiny movements, as if she were trying to tell him something, but Naruto could not hear anything. As he gently nudged the girl, hoping that she could somehow respond to him, he asked, hoping that she would somehow respond. "I apologize, I missed that. What were you saying?" he said, putting his ear closer to her mouth in the hopes of hearing what she was saying and gaining some insight into her condition. "Rai so hungry," she uttered in a heartbreaking voice. Naruto knew all too well how much pain the girl was in because he had felt the terrible sensation of someone grabbing hold of his heart with their bare hands and crushing it. Just by hearing those words, however, the thought alone only made him wonder more. Did souls really need to eat? Were there animals that could be hunted for food? Could he even taste food? Was there anywhere that served ramen? No, stay focused, damn it, you have an emergency here. Naruto scolded himself in his mind. He quickly regained consciousness and looked around to gain a better understanding of his surroundings. He saw that a large area to his left was thriving with several trees and shrubbery, which he assumed was a park of some kind. He picked up the girl gingerly and hurried towards the area. Searching for a safe and secluded spot, he spotted an old tree in the corner of the shrub fence that surrounded the entire park, so he put the girl down and propped her against it before crouching down to eye level with her. Calmly, he said, "Okay, I have to go away for a while." "What? However, why? Please, the girl pleaded frantically. He appeased them by saying, "I'm just going out to get some food and medical supplies, okay? I didn't say that I was leaving for good, therefore, please wait until I return and stay here. Could you help me with that?" He thought that the girl had seen something like this before, because she just looked up at him frantically, her eyes slowly glistening, as if she were seeing him for the last time. "Look, I can assure you that it won't abandon you. I promise that I will return to get you." She stared at him for what seemed like an eternity until she raised her right fist with her pinky finger extended. "If there's one thing about me that's always absolute is that I never go back on my word," he said, looking her in the eye with a serious expression. He had to suppress a flinch as he remembered how he had ended up here, but his words had the desired effect, as the girl no longer looked like she was about to cry, though he could still see some doubt in her eyes. "Pinky promise?" she inquired. "Pinky promise?" Naruto replied confidently, grinning as he hooked his own pinky finger with hers. "Now I really have to go, before all of the good stuff is gone. But I swear, I'll be back." As he ran, he couldn't help but wonder why he had brought up his old nindo. He felt ashamed of himself for not upholding his own way of the ninja, especially since he had used it to calm the poor girl down. He felt even worse because he felt as though he had lied to her. How could he have made such a promise to a girl he had just met when he couldn't even complete the important promises he made to his teammate? He thought grimly, "Hell, what right do I have to keep my nindo at all, since I failed Sakura-chan?" And then he forced a serious expression on his face. "But I don't have time to mope and feel sorry for myself. I made a promise to someone that truly needs my help. I can't afford to let her down. She's been without food for far too long. I have to." At that moment, Naruto felt like he should be kicking himself for not considering the fact that, in his haste to help the girl, he had forgotten that he was lacking one crucial necessity. Money. The very thing that makes the world turn round, as some had put it. Naruto was shocked that he had overlooked something so important. Without any money, how could he possibly get anything? When he passed on to Rukonagi, he was absolutely certain that he had nothing left. And since the enigmatic girl wouldn't have been in her current state, he was positive that she didn't have any on her either. Naruto knew he was already in one of the open market areas that primarily sold food, clothing, medicine, and other necessities. Just as he was about to begin mentally berating himself for not thinking things through yet again. Realizing that he simply didn't pay attention to his destination, he gazed longingly at the items that were both so near and so far away. The former shinobi guessed that based on the vendors' looks, they wouldn't be particularly interested in charitable donations for underprivileged kids. But because he was short on time and couldn't afford the things he needed, Naruto had to come to terms with the fact that stealing was his only choice. It just depended on timing, having the appropriate equipment on hand, and having a good diversion he was confident that he could pull it off. He was fortunate to still have his shuriken kunai holster with him because his training had equipped him to handle a situation like this. All he needed now was someone to divert his attention and perhaps assign responsibility to. After darting into a nearby alley, Naruto started searching for a potential stool pigeon to use. Even though there were many more people around than he remembered from his last memory, he didn't see anyone who stood out or could effectively deflect attention from him until he noticed a disturbance coming toward the stands he was aiming for. When he finally got a good look at what was causing the commotion, his eyes widened. Oh, this is so ideal. He got a cunning expression on his face and thought gleefully. Returning to the park, the blonde boy put the girl by the tree and she waited patiently. All she could do was sit beneath the tree and try to distract herself from her rumbling, growling stomach. She had no idea how she had ended up in this situation, or why that odd-looking boy with the whiskers was assisting her. Although she was appreciative that someone was willing to assist her when everyone else simply ignored her and moved on, she questioned why he would even make the effort to do so. She couldn't understand why he wanted to help her, of course, because she'd been living alone all this time and had become suspicious of people. She had never been that poor before, so how she ended up almost starving to death was what truly baffled her. That's what she believed, anyway. To be honest, she was unable to pinpoint how she became this way. She was looking for a place to sleep and was aware that she lived alone. She felt something hit the back of her head, and the last thing she remembered before fainting was running into a man wearing white. She was exhausted and lying on the ground when she regained consciousness. With no idea where she was going, she then started to explore District 64 in the hopes of finding something that would aid in her memory recovery. All she had managed to do, however, was to come closer to learning what had happened while also almost dying of starvation. Hey, I'm back, sorry to keep you waiting. The girl was taken out of her reverie to witness an unbelievable sight when she recognized the voice of that enigmatic boy. Loaves of bread, fruits, sandwich meats, sliced cheese, vegetables, bottles of water, bandages, healing ointments, 2 blankets, and other necessities were all in the boy's heavy load. When he returned, she was unable to speak as she tried to understand how he had gotten away with stealing so much. However, Naruto interpreted her silence as a negative response. Is this not enough? Because, if you want more, I can always. The girl exclaimed. What? No, 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 that's all right. This is more than enough. Before Naruto left once more, I'm just surprised that you've brought back so much. That's all. How did you manage to sneak away with all of this anyway? Naruto remembered how he had executed the hit, and his gaze fled to the right. Returning to the open market, the garish-looking person from earlier yelled, "Let go of me! Let go of me this instant, you filthy pigs!" As the 3 Shinigami assigned to patrol the district that day dragged her and her 2 friends away. Do you have any idea of who we are? The patrolling Shinigami testily responded, yeah, we do. You and your friends are the main suspects for the robberies that occurred at 2 major stands. Us? Thieves? That's absolutely absurd. We would never do something so dastardly. It is completely beneath us, she yelled. The Shinigami held up 2 plastic evidence bags that contained a roll of bandages and 2 of the several 4-pointed stars that were discovered at the crime scene. Oh, really? Then would you mind explaining to me what you all were doing at the scene of the crime? Or for that matter, why we found stolen merchandise from the stands in question, as well as the weapons that were used in the robberies on all 3 of you, He was asking. When the woman saw the items, her eyes grew wide. But, that's impossible. Those aren't mine. I've never say. He and his partners dragged the 3 suspects back to the detainment center, the women struggling and screaming that they were framed or that they didn't deserve to be treated like commoners. Never seen them in my entire life. If I had a yen for every time I've heard that excuse, my division wouldn't be tasked with guarding the north alley of wandering spirits. Now, come on. We've got a cell back at the station with your and your friends' names on it. In the park, Naruto put all of the food he had obtained on a blanket he had laid out on the ground and muttered, let's just say that I had some help from a few people that I met earlier. Well, go ahead. Dig in. You look like you haven't eaten in a year. The girl practically jumped into the pile of food Naruto had brought back, so she didn't need to be reminded twice. Almost trembling with joy at having something edible to eat at last, she snatched up an apple and took a big bite out of it. She exclaimed, "Oh, thank you so much. You've truly saved my life." Before snatching up a pear and starting to nibble on the fruit alternately, she quickly went to get 2 more apples to eat. After they were reduced to cores, Naruto simply sat there and watched as the girl devoured the baguette in front of her along with the fruits and vegetables. Even though he was glad to have been of assistance, he felt sorry for her because of how ravenously she was eating. This girl, he thought sadly, hasn't eaten in a long time, but why is she out here by herself? Her parents ought to be caring for her, don't they? He blushed slightly when he heard a growl come from his stomach. It seemed that the blow had affected him far more than he had anticipated. All he could hope was that she didn't notice. But when the girl heard a familiar gurgling sound that, for once, wasn't coming from her own stomach, she did pay attention. She was about to eat another apple. She offered the apple she was about to eat to the only person who ever bothered to assist her after realizing exactly where the sound was coming from. No thanks, I'll be alright. Besides, you need this more than I do. I can go for a while without eating, laughed Naruto sheepishly. He hoped she would just believe him when he said that he had brought her some food, but he didn't want to eat any of it. The girl gave him a very serious look and pushed the apple closer to him, refusing to fall for his charade. Naruto accepted the girl's offered fruit and said, "Oh, okay, if you insist." After that, her face brightened. "It wouldn't be right if you just sat there and watched me eat after everything that you've gone through to get all of this. Besides, I know how painful it is to go without food, so I wouldn't want you to go through the same experience, so help yourself. It's your food too," she said with a slight grin on her face. Naruto couldn't resist grinning too. He had to concur with Teuchi and Ayame as he bit into the apple. People were friendlier when they were full. In between bites, he remarked, "Oh, by the way, I don't think we've introduced ourselves. The name's Naruto Uzumaki. What's yours?" The girl was chewing a piece of bread when she swallowed it. She replied, still sporting that adorable smile, "I'm Rangaku Matsumoto. It's nice to meet you, Naruto-kun. You're a really nice person, but I don't think that I've ever seen you around here before." "Why is that, Naruto-kun?" Rangaku's question caused Naruto's expression to darken. "Well, to tell you the truth, the reason that you've just met me is because I've just recently died, Rangaku-chan," he said with sorrow. Rangaku instantly regretted she had asked her question. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I didn't mean to bring it up," she explained. "No, it's okay. Rangaku-chan, you didn't know about it even though I've only been dead for a short while. I'm beginning to adjust," replied Naruto with a smile. "I just wish that damn Shinigami didn't lie to me." "Lie to you? Why would a Shinigami lie to you?" "She claimed that I had to let her send me to the Soul Society, or otherwise I would turn into a horrible monster if I had remained in the land of the living, but when I'd let her do the Konso thing, I ended up in some place called Rukanagi District 64 instead of the Soul Society. I can't believe I listened to that liar." Rangaku watched, perplexed. "But, Naruto-kun, you are in Soul Society." "What? I said that you are in Soul Society. Rukanagi is a part of the Soul Society. It's where a majority of the souls live. However, why does this district appear so dilapidated if this is where people go after they pass away? Is this where all souls go after they die?" Naruto inquired. "Naruto-kun, not all of them," Rangaku said, shaking her head. "Most of the time, it's just a matter of luck. As you can see, there are 320 districts in Rukanagi, with 80 districts in each of the 4 cardinal directions: north, east, south, and west. The standard of living declines as the number of districts rises. Like Junranen of West Rukanagi, District 1 is regarded as the most opulent neighborhood to live in, with immaculate streets, delicious food, and a crime-free atmosphere. On the other hand, District 80s, such as North Zaraki, are regarded as the worst places to live. The living conditions are nearly non-existent, and it serves as a hiding place for criminals. However, Sarate, the most significant area of Soul Society, is encircled by all 320 districts. Sarate is where the Shinigami live." "So, what you're saying is that we're essentially living in a civilized ghetto because we're in District 64 right now?" asked Naruto incredulously. "Well, it's not really what I would call a ghetto. However, this is one of the poorer districts." Rangaku was taken aback by the abrupt shift in Naruto's expression. As he became silent and his face took on a deadpan expression, she assumed that Naruto must have been deeply distressed by something, and she was about to inquire as to why he was acting so cold and distant. "That damned monkey brat. That caught her off guard." "Monkey brat?" she inquired. "Oh, I'm sorry about that," Naruto said, blushing in shame at expressing his private thoughts. "It's simply a moniker for the Shinigami who introduced me to this place. Her last name was Sarugaki, which literally translates to monkey brat." As I recall, Naruto laughed with Rangaku and remarked, "I'd be surprised if no one has ever called her that before." With Sarugaki Hiyori, she was in a foul mood when she was sent out after sending that annoying blonde ninja to the Soul Society, and she had used the hollows that were there as a way to vent her frustrations. The lieutenant of the 12th Division was just cleaning her sword after killing yet another hollow that plagued the sector she was supposed to be patrolling. She was about to phone for a portal back to Sarate when she felt a strange sensation at the back of her head, which was similar to the feeling she gets whenever her captain makes fun of her height, but slightly different. It was as if someone else was making fun of her for a completely different but no less degrading reason, and she had been plagued by it for some time. So, another intelligent fool believes he can get away with mocking me, don't you think? I swear, I'm going to beat that smug bastard into a bloody pulp in the most agonizing ways imaginable, she said to herself, her eyebrows twitching all the while. Returning to North District 64, in any case, I wanted to ask you earlier, but what specifically was the reason behind your solo outing? Naruto inquired. Rangaku took it upon himself to appear depressed this time, saying, I'm not exactly sure myself, she said, regretfully, I can't remember anything aside from my name. The fact that I've been living on my own, and that I have no place to call home. Naruto felt foolish for not being more tactful about what was appropriate to say around girls, especially one who appeared to have gone through a difficult time. It's really annoying. I've been trying all this time to try and regain my memories, and yet nothing's come back to me, she said abruptly as she threw her hands to the ground, her eyes fixed on the spot where her hands were. I've been aimlessly wandering around in the hopes of finding someone or something to help me remember where I was going. I almost died as a result, though, because everyone I asked for assistance either ignored me or treated me like a parasite. All I want is to remember who I am, regardless of whether I was raised in a wealthy household, was abandoned at birth, or had any friends. Do you have any idea what it's like to go on living without knowing if there is anyone out there who genuinely cares? She cried, her body trembling and tears slowly streaming to the floor. To be openly disregarded when you need assistance? To be aware that nobody around you gives a damn about your survival? In addition to the fact that Naruto was not going to stay now that he had kept his word to her, everyone wanted to avoid her, and she was certain that he would be no different after all, who would want to be around an amnesic nobody like her? She didn't bother to suppress the silent tears at this point because she was simply too tired of holding everything inside. Her face shot up to meet Naruto's to ask him why he was wasting her time with her, but she was shocked to see a few tears streaming down his cheeks as he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her into a big embrace. Naruto remorsefully remarked, I know all too well what you've been through, Rangaku-chan. I've felt the same way from the day I was born until the day I died. It's like there's no purpose to your life, and strangers sneer and glare at you every time you pass by. Every day, I've had people I thought were my friends make fun of me because that's what everyone else does. Everyone in my former village treated me with hatred and animosity as a child simply for being alive. Rangaku's eyes widened at how detailed the boy hugging her described what she had gone through, and she looked intently into his eyes, trying to find any signs of dishonesty, but all she saw were sincerity and sympathy within those pools of deep ocean blue, the eyes of someone who had been forced to endure one hardship after another throughout their entire life, someone who had seen firsthand just how cruel people can be to each other. And I know that the worst part of being alone is not having someone to rely on, someone to console you when you're feeling down. The problem is that you don't have to be by yourself. He wiped away the tears and said, not anymore, Rangaku-chan. Despite everything that had happened to me, I still found people that accepted me, he said, his eyes rapidly returning to their typical sunny disposition. They served as my light, preventing me from being engulfed by the constant darkness in the same way that I want to be there for you. They were there for me anytime I needed assistance. I've practically lived through hell when I was alive, and I'll be damned if I allow another person to go through the same torture that I have, Naruto said, releasing his hold to face Rangaku, who gasped in shock, barely believing what she had heard. He concluded with a toothy smile that resembled a fox's. I know that you've just met me and that you're still missing your memories, but I'd really like to be friends with you, Rangaku-chan. You truly want to be my friend, do you? She asked, mimicking the bashful Hyuga heiress he had known in the past. I'm aware that I'm not the most skilled person in the shed and that I still don't fully comprehend how the Soul Society operates. However, before he could finish, Rangaku slammed into him and threw her arms around him in one of the fiercest hugs Naruto had ever experienced. What was even more significant to him, though, was how he felt her trembling against him and the tiny wet spots that were getting bigger on the front of his kimono. She whispered, I don't want to be alone anymore. In an attempt to console her, Naruto simply grinned calmly and gave her a hug in return while idly stroking her hair. And you'll never will be from now on, Rangaku-chan. I'll always be there for you, I promise. Thank you, sniffled the girl in his arms, who did not attempt to break the contact. Naruto simply sat there, letting Rangaku vent all of the pain and misery she had gone through onto him. Sure, things didn't start out well for him at first, but in the end, it didn't seem as bad as he once thought it would be. So what if he didn't end up in the most opulent part of Rukanagi? Now that he had a friend who was so similar to him that it was almost frightening, and unlike in Konoha, Rangaku seemed to genuinely care about his well-being. Unfortunately, that brought his thoughts back to Konoha, and how the village would be handling his death. He knew that most people still thought poorly of him because of the Kyuubi, and that only a few people would truly be sad about his passing. Well, there's nothing I can do about it now. It's not like my death is going to affect the village as a whole. Everyone hates me, and they'll be happy to get rid of me. In fact, I bet that they're celebrating my death right now. Oh, sure, the people who truly cared about me will be sad, but they have their own friends and family to help them. Plus, now that the fox and I are dead, the Akatsuki will have no reason to target Konoha. The Konohagakure, the village's shinobi forces, were all dressed in black and gathered at the newest addition to the graveyard, which was reserved exclusively for those who have died in the line of duty. It was here that they would pay their respects to one Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Yes, Naruto's entire heritage was finally revealed, and now everyone in the entire village knew the gray sky and steady rain perfectly matched the overall mood of the village. It had only been a day after the failed Uchiha retrieval mission. It had all started when Tsunade held an emergency council meeting, in which she declared that Sasuke Uchiha had willingly defected from the village, and that he was to be marked as a missing nin. While the civilian council was in an uproar, the Shinobi Council gave their full support to the Hokage's decree, which instantly quelled any attempt to get the Hokage to reconsider her decision for the civilians. It was when she mentioned that Naruto was killed by Sasuke that things went downhill. The civilian council's attitude did a complete reversal, saying how the Uchiha had done them a favor before he left. The shinobi side were just nonplussed about the revelation, but she could have sworn that she saw the Inuzuka and Hyuga clan heads smirking. But then, one arrogant counselor had the gall to say how that killing Naruto would have been enough to pardon Sasuke of his crimes. That was the last time anyone heard him speak, as the very moment the comment left his mouth, his head was forcefully separated from his body courtesy of one of Tsunade's chakra-enhanced punches. While it may have not been the best response she could have made as Hokage, she did manage to get everyone's undivided attention. It was an opportunity, however, in which she fully took advantage of. She wasted no time in berating the civilian council for their callous and prejudiced behavior towards Naruto, treating him with disdain and hostility for something that wasn't his fault. She then redirected her anger at the gathered shinobi clan heads, tearing into them at how they acted no better than the civilians, and had even gone as far as allowing their clansmen secretly orchestrate assaults on the boy. Her glare lingered on Sume and Hiyashi for a brief moment at that point. When the another bold citizen demanded why she was making big deal about Naruto's death, Tsunade shocked everyone present by revealing who Naruto's parents were. That had gotten the desired results as the whole room became dead silent. Unsurprisingly, it was the same civilian that broke the silence, vehemently denying her claim to be true. It gave Tsunade a bit of grim satisfaction at seeing the council's reactions when she produced the necessary documents to prove her claims valid. Now, everyone was mourning over the Naruto's death, including the very people that had made it their duty to make the boy's existence miserable. Fucking hypocrites, the whole lot of them, thought Tsunade with a scowl. The minute Naruto's parents are made known, these bastards act as if the Yandere has died again. Yet not too long ago, they were planning a celebration over his death. But her gaze softened somewhat when she spotted some of the few people that didn't treat Naruto with scorn. The surviving members of the retrieval squad was at the front most of the gathered group, each of them solemn-faced and silent in paying their respects to their fallen comrade. Behind them stood the rest of the Konoha 12 inches and their Jonin instructors. Hinata was heavily leaning on Kurenai for support as she tried her best not to break down in despair. Sakura wasn't faring well either, even with Ino by her side. Neji, she observed, still was displaying the generic emotionless Hyuga expression, but she could see from his stance that it was just to hide his grief. She also spotted Iruka Amino behind the group, standing by Konohamaru and his little friends. To her surprise, Kakashi was actually on time for his student's funeral. She had half expected him to arrive 3 hours late like he usually did, but what was even more unexpected was the fact that Suna's siblings were present as well. When she asked why they had wanted to stay for the funeral, Gaara was the one to answer for the trio. "I want to pay my respect to the one shinobi who saved me from my own self-destruction." Tsunade was taken aback by that and realized how powerful Naruto could be when he wasn't so hyperactive. She thought that he would have been a great Hokage, but then grim reality brought her back to the present. She wasn't looking forward to telling Jiraiya about his godson's fate because she knew that he had wanted to take him on a 3-year training trip in preparation for the Akatsuki, and she didn't even want to think about what he would do after he found out. She sighed and looked up at the rain cloud-filled sky, watching helplessly as the rain kept falling. It was a somber day in Konoha, as the village would lose the last descendant of the Uzumaki clan and one of its greatest heroes, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of Minato Namikaze, Konoha's Yellow Flash and Yondaime Hokage, and Kushina Uzumaki, the red-hot-blooded habanero and second Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. How fitting. It's as if heaven itself is crying for you, Naruto, she thought sorrowfully before approaching the head of the casket to begin the funeral services. The Wandering Spirits North Alley. It had been nearly 1.5 years since Naruto had met Rangaku. During that time, the two had become the best of friends and learned to depend on each other. With Rangaku's knowledge of Soul Society, and Naruto's experience from when he was a shinobi, they were never too bad off. They found little jobs that they would pay them just enough to buy food for a day, but they never kept the same job for more than a couple of weeks, lest they draw unnecessary attention to themselves. Yet despite their teamwork, they did have a few days in which they nearly had to go a day without eating. At those times, the whiskered blonde solved their plight with one of his raids, but this time he only stole enough for a day or two. There was no sense in stealing a week's worth of food, and then have to lay low for nearly a month. Rangaku, however, wasn't too keen on Naruto's last resort of stealing food for them, and had always made her opinion on the matter verbally known to him. In fact, it was the only time that Naruto had ever seen the girl angry. Yet despite his friend's attitude to his alternative plan for obtaining food, Naruto was more than willing to take the risk as opposed to seeing Rangaku starve again. It was an argument the two friends had countless, but after one particularly lengthy one that progressed to raised voices and unshed tears, the duo had reached a compromise. Naruto would only go out on one of his raids if it was an utmost emergency, and only if Rangaku gave her permission to do so beforehand. Despite that one incident, the two blondes had established a sort of routine that they adhered to religiously. Each morning, after a quick breakfast, they would go to their respective jobs and work for the majority of the day. After they got off, which would be around late noon to early evening, they would meet up at the park where they first became friends. They would then have a small dinner, before going to bed. Although they were frequently exhausted by the end of the day's work, they always made time for each other. Whether it was for a walk or simply discussing the events of the day, they were happy to be together, despite the seemingly endless monotony that constituted their lives, but they had no idea that their lives would soon be forever altered. "Are you saying that I'm being fired?" As he struggled to stop himself from strangling the obese slob of a man who used to be his boss, Naruto cursed. "The head manager is coming to check the place in 2 days, and I don't want him to see any homeless children working for me," he said in a wheezy voice. "It's simple, kid. I take it you understand? It's only business." "My ass, business. I've been employed by your restaurant for more than 3 weeks, putting in absurdly long hours for pitifully little pay. Hell, even though they only work 2 or 3 days a week, your part-time employees earn more money than I do," Naruto retorted, his temper growing weaker by the moment. "Yeah, but what were you expecting? They aren't destitute stragglers searching for food in trash cans and handouts. When they apply for jobs, they are able to present legitimate credentials. You're fortunate that I gave hiring you any thought at all." "Legit credentials? Who needs legit credentials to work as a dishwasher or a busboy?" The slob started to saunter back to his office after saying, "You know the rules. Unless you can provide a real address and proper identification, you're not fit to work. Now get out of here. I've got potential employees to interview." Naruto halted the manager in his tracks and said, "Aren't you forgetting something?" The man simply looked at the boy as though he were a bothersome annoyance. What do you want now?" Naruto answered, "My payment," and extended his hand to emphasize his point. "I've worked at this joint for 3 days since my last payday, so I would like you to pay me for the days that I worked whilst I was still under your employment. TCH, not on your life, kid. Or did you forget our little agreement when I hired you on? Because if I recall, you agreed to work for me on the grounds that you would be working longer hours, a smaller paycheck, and that you would only be paid for every work week you've completed." The overweight man gave a cruel chuckle. "Tough break, kid, but them's the rules." "What? I never agr You never said anything about that stipulation." The manager took the document out of an inner pocket in his oily howry and pointed to a specific line of text, saying, "Didn't need to, it was specifically mentioned in our little contract." Naruto squinted to find the absurd clause, but his eyes widened when he discovered it tucked away in the text. "You've got that damn thing practically buried. No one could have possibly found it in their first reading." The fat man smugly stuffed the contract back into his howry and said, "Hey, it's not my fault you don't read contracts carefully. This is completely unfair. You can't do this." "Well, guess what, brat? I just did, and there's not a thing that you can do about it. Sure, you can call the local authorities, but who do you think they're going to believe? A respectful shift manager of a restaurant, or a no-name street rat that's been known to steal food from the vendors in this neighborhood?" Knowing that the repulsive slob had him where he wanted, Naruto winced. Shortly after, the patrol Shinigami had instructed him to keep an eye out for anyone suspicious who had goods from a high-quality fruit vendor. The blonde was caught by the man eating some of his spoils in one of his more amateurish errors. Naruto initially believed that his boss didn't give a damn about his work as long as he was employed by him, but it was now clear that he was simply waiting for the right opportunity to turn it against him, unwilling to give the fat boss the satisfaction of hearing him concede defeat. Naruto quietly left the restaurant, knowing that he had no way to reverse the blackmail from his former boss. With a flurry of fear and anxiety racing through his head, Naruto bounded out of the back kitchen, through the main dining room, and out the front door. It was a way to earn money for food, clothing, and other necessities for him and Rangaku, even though the whiskered blonde detested working for that jerk. Furthermore, it was not a good time for him to be unemployed. Rangaku was having a difficult time finding another job after the store where she was working closed about 2 weeks ago. Additionally, it was much harder for them to buy food because their income had been essentially cut in half. The cooks were kind enough to give him the leftover food when they closed for the evening, and Naruto managed to sneak a few meals from his job without his jerk boss noticing, but it was still insufficient. However, he had no idea what to do now that he was jobless once more. Naruto-kun. Naruto's inner monologue was abruptly interrupted, and he found himself standing a short distance from the clearing that he and Rangaku had made their makeshift home. The fact that he had returned home without even recognizing it was a little unsettling. As she walked toward him, he smiled wearily and said, "Hey there, Rangaku-chan." The girl in front of him didn't resemble the one he had discovered upon his arrival in Soul Society. She no longer appeared to be in danger of starving to death on the streets, since they could now purchase food virtually every day. She had grown her hair to her shoulders and was wearing a much cleaner black kimono than the one she had been wearing before. The bright pink silk scarf she wore around her neck, however, was the most obvious alteration to her appearance from one of the stalls they had passed on their way to work. He had witnessed her admiring it because the scarf was made of fine silk. Naruto felt that the surprisingly high cost was well worth it when he gave it to her on her birthday, which also happened to be the day they met. The expression on her face was priceless. He always smiled when he thought of that memory. "The flashback begins," Naruto exclaimed. "Hey, Rangaku-chan," as he watched his friend head for their home. A huge smile spreading across his face, he was prepared to surprise her by hiding a small package wrapped in old newspapers behind his back, but when he saw how depressed she appeared, his cheerful disposition completely collapsed. "Hey, what's wrong?" she said dejectedly. "I got fired from my job at the clothes store, Naruto-kun." "What?" Naruto cried out. "Why? I thought the manager liked you." She quickly clarified, "She did, until she caught me trying to steal from her, but I didn't do it, I swear." "Of course you didn't. I know that you would never do such a thing, but why would the manager?" Rangaku grimaced and said, "It was Maho Kazami. She snuck several of the more expensive products into my locker whilst I was on my break. When the manager noticed the products missing, Maho led her straight to me." "But you were innocent. Didn't your boss at least give you a chance to explain your side of the story?" "TCH. Of course she didn't. If she had to choose between firing a legal employee like Maho or some homeless bum like me, it'd be obvious that she'd go with the one that wasn't supposed to be working there in the first place." She exhaled. "So it looks like our funds are going to be strained for a while. Well, at least until I can find another job." He frowned, remembering the moment he had met the woman he had presumed to be impartial and fair. "I'm so sorry, Rangaku-chan. I know how much you liked working there. I can't believe that fat bitch just fired you just from the lies of that spoiled bitch Maho. I am so going to make her pay for this, make no mistake." The strawberry blonde let out an exhausted sigh and said, "No, Naruto-kun, don't even think about that. Look, can we please not talk about this now? I've had a very long day." With an elaborate flourish, Naruto whipped the wrapped package from behind his back and presented it to his friend. "Oh, yeah, sure, of course," he replied, scolding himself inwardly for thinking about Rangaku's negative experience. "And I have just the thing to help distract you. Happy birthday, Rangaku-chan." The surprise in Rangaku's eyes grew. "My birthday? Do you know what today is?" Naruto asked, nodding. "Of course I do. It's September 29th. We met each other 1 year ago today. And we both decided that day that September 29th would also be?" Her eyes flashed with realization. "My birthday." The strawberry blonde lightly conked the side of her head with her fist, sticking out her tongue playfully. "I'm such an airhead. My own birthday has completely slipped my mind due to my hectic schedule." But as soon as she remembered what had actually happened earlier that day, her positive attitude quickly faded. That is, until Naruto gave her a light nose flick, which caused her to pout adorable ly. With a broad smile on his face, Naruto said, "Hey now, none of that. I won't let you waste this special day worrying about work, alright? Let's take care of that mess tomorrow." Despite her desire to object, Rangaku couldn't help but smile as she accepted Naruto's gift, which she saw was wrapped in old newspapers, because the happy disposition of the whiskered blonde was simply too contagious to ignore. Sorry about the messy appearance, but I couldn't find any good cheap wrapping paper within my budget, laughed Naruto. But you'll really like what's waiting underneath the wrapping, I assure you. Rangaku just giggled at her friend's enthusiasm, as she tore into the newspaper with gusto, revealing a small bundle wrapped in thin white tissue paper that was extremely light in her hands. Her curiosity piqued even more. She carefully removed the secondary layer of paper, and gasped at what she saw. There in her hands, was a long, silken scarf, just like the ones that she had seen from that one stall that she passed by every day on her way to and from work. Word on the street was that they were tailored out of the softest of silk, by a woman who was a retired seamstress. She had always wanted one, but they were just too expensive, since most of their money went into buying food and other necessities. And then, in a cruel twist of fate, the very day that they could spare enough money to buy one was the day that the stall had sold the very last scarf. To make matters worse, the vendor said that the woman had stopped making them due to health issues. That was a sad day for the girl, as she thought that she'd lost her chance to buy something really nice, and yet, here was one lying in her hands and it was pink, her favorite color. She stammered incredulously, this is, before turning to look at Naruto. Where did you get this? Well, I noticed how often you'd stop by to look at those things, so I started saving up a little secret fund, Naruto said, his face turning sheepish as he started to aimlessly scratch his cheek. When I got off work early, I was fortunate enough to save up enough cash to purchase the final one. The only scarf they had left was pink, but the real challenge was keeping it hidden until your birthday. Naruto explained. I apologize if the color is incorrect, but... Whatever Naruto was about to say was cut off when Rangaku slammed into him and threw her arms around him in a huge embrace, knocking the wind out of him. Naruto was momentarily stunned, given that he didn't have much close contact with people while he was alive, but he still managed to return the hug in a slightly awkward way. I adore it, Rangaku joyfully exclaimed. I adore it. Really? Rangaku gave him a final squeeze before taking a step back with a big smile on her face, asked Naruto, not sure what he was hearing. I certainly do. I've never received a better birthday present than this one. Rangaku released her grip on her friend and wrapped the silk garment around her neck, tying it with a simple knot. Now sporting her newest accessory, she struck a pose, holding a peace sign and winking at Naruto. Technically, it was the only birthday present she could remember ever receiving, but that was irrelevant. How'd I look, then? As Naruto observed her appearance, he started to realize that he was struggling to control his imminent blush. He couldn't figure out why, but things had started changing between Rangaku and him, starting with the little things, like the way she always hugged him after he got home from work, or how she always seemed to make him laugh when he was feeling low, and then moving on to more complex things, like the way her eyes always seemed to shine in the moonlight, how her laughter would send excited shivers down his spine, or how she always ended up cuddling up against him when they slept. He was starting to feel things that he had never before, not even when he'd been pursuing Sakura's affections while he was still among the living. That thought alone had kept the Uzumaki up for several nights, with innumerable unanswered questions constantly bothering him. Oh my god, Naruto-kun? Do you still accompany me? Don't leave me hanging like this, the blonde with whiskers said, waking up from his reverie to find Rangaku still in the same pose. Will you not respond to my query? Oh, Rangaku-chan. I apologize. Through his nervous stuttering, Naruto managed to say, why, you look really cute in that scarf. Rangaku's cheeks darkened with a slight flush, and his eyes widened in surprise. Do you really mean that? Of course I do. He cursed himself for sounding so nervous. She was his friend, so he shouldn't have any trouble talking to her. It's just that I wish that I could have gotten you something more than just a scarf. He was about to say that he wanted to buy her something else when he felt a pair of moist, warm lips press against his cheek. He turned to his left and noticed that Rangaku was blushing profusely, but she managed to smile a little. Before giving the other blonde another hug, she muttered, well, I think it's perfect. Thank you for the lovely present, Naruto-kun. Flashback comes to an end. Kun Naruto. Rangaku's voice snapped the whiskered blonde out of his reverie, and he saw his friend staring at him with worried eyes. I apologize. I've had a terrible day. Rangaku-chan, exactly what were you saying? He inquired. Rangaku sighed in frustration at her friend's tendency to nod off at the most inconvenient moments. I asked, what are you doing at home early? You typically leave work later than this, don't you? As soon as his thoughts turned to the disaster he had just gone through, Naruto's mood soured. Rangaku could tell something was amiss by his dejected expression. What's wrong, Naruto-kun? Taking a deep breath, Naruto said, I was just let go from the restaurant. What? However, why? For nearly a month, Your boss has been forcing you to work 6 days a week for less money. Why would he fire you like that, right out of the blue? Apparently, the fat bastard believed that a street rat like me working there would make for a bad report. When the general manager stopped by this week, however, he made sure to fire me after I was almost done for the day. But you do realize that he paid you for the days you worked? Ha! Have you really seen Rangaku-chan, the man I used to work for? Laughed Naruto, his voice laced with sarcasm. The fact that he always wears expensive clothing and weighs more than the two of us put together indicates that he is more concerned with filling his own wallet than with paying his staff a fair wage. In addition, he was able to deceive me into signing a contract that only paid me for each completed work week, and guess who was just 4 days late for next week's paycheck? He jabbed his thumb at himself to finish. That is totally unjust. Rangaku yelled. How could he have done something so arg? I would punt him if he were right here. Are you unable to do anything? At her inquisitive look, Naruto grimaced and added, the guy caught me in an awkward position when I grabbed a few things from that old high-quality produce store, but didn't do anything or turn me in. Not if we want the local authorities to catch wind of us. I assumed he simply forgot about it because he didn't fire me right away that day. He was simply holding onto his small discovery until he needed it, so I suppose that was just wishful thinking on my part. That chubby jerk. Before embracing the other blonde, Rangaku gave an angry growl and said, I'm sorry that you were fired from your job, Naruto-kun. Thank you, Rangaku-chan, but I should apologize instead. Naruto, who didn't want to ask what was on his mind but knew that he couldn't just put it off until later, returned the hug and said, I mean, me getting fired isn't exactly what we need at this moment. Just out of curiosity, how much food do we have left? Just enough to last us for about 3 days. How is the financial situation? We probably have enough to buy enough supplies to last us 2 more days. And what about the job interviews? Naruto said, suppressing the curse he wanted to yell. Have you scheduled any potential callbacks? Rangaku simply shook her head, unwilling to respond, and Naruto sighed again, starting to get a headache. It all seemed to come crashing down at once. Look, don't we have a mess? So, do you now regret not accepting that Jingai's offer to go to Seirei? Naruto asked himself before lowering his eyes back to the girl who was still holding him. He yelled as Rangaku gave him a sharp pinch on his arm. Her annoyed expression made it clear that she wasn't amused. It isn't amusing, Naruto-kun. I believed we had decided to stop discussing that, she reprimanded. I know, but I was just saying that. Look, I know what you're talking about, but 5 months ago, I meant what I said. You do recall our promise, don't you? Start of the flashback. For once, Naruto was in a good mood. He had finished his work at his current job as a stockboy for a grocery store, which allowed him to punch out at 3 p.m., and he had found a sale on apples, bread, and ground beef. He was on his way to surprise Rangaku, as she usually got off work at this time, and as he turned the corner, he was surprised to see his friend talking to a boy who appeared to be around their age. He had white, pale hair, and his clothes were in somewhat better shape than both his and Rangaku's, though he could still see some minor stains and tears, but it was the boy's face that caught his attention. His big smile, coupled with his closed eyes, gave him the impression that he was simultaneously a weasel, a fox, and a snake. Rangaku-chan. His yell was successful in getting his friend's attention, and when she saw her best friend coming toward her, her eyes brightened. Naruto-kun. Why are you here? She yelled as she rushed over to embrace him strongly. I chose to surprise you because I was able to finish all of my work ahead of schedule. We will have everything we need for the next few days thanks to some good deals I was able to find at the grocery store. Rangaku gave a joyful cheer, and the odd boy gave him a puzzled look. You also have to eat? The boy inquired. Well, yeah, because not eating is just too painful and uncomfortable. Oh, what's your name? Naruto asked, staring at him as though he had grown a second head. Oh, I apologize. I totally forgot. Rangaku interrupted, then pointed to the boy next to her, saying, This is Jin Ichimaru. Naruto-kun, this is Naruto Uzumaki, my best friend, Jin-san. Jin made a small, courteous bow and said, It's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto-san. With a bow of his own, Naruto answered, Likewise, but back to your question. When you learned that Rangaku-chan and I must eat, why did it surprise you? Because the average soul doesn't actually need a lot of food to survive. Only those who consume a lot of Riryoku need to be fed continuously. Rei-yo wa. Riryoku, as it is commonly called, is spiritual energy. It is the energy that each soul in the Soul Society possesses. Shinigami typically have the largest reserves of Riryoku. Though the amount varies from soul to soul, their ability to improve their fighting skills through Riryoku allows them to protect the souls in the living world as well as ours. Naruto was intrigued by that ever since that Sarugaki girl had assisted him in dying. He had been interested in the inner workings of the Shinigami if they used this Riryoku to fight. He assumed that they were somewhat like the shinobi from his former home world, but he was still unsure of something. Jin-san, how do you know all of this? With caution, Naruto asked. Naruto became alert for some reason as Jin's smile grew. Well, it's simple, really. Jin said I also have Riryoku, although I don't have as much as you do. Naruto-san, I would say that I'm on par with Rangaku-chan. Naruto couldn't help but frown at how familiar the strange boy seemed to act with his friend, that annoying feeling returning, albeit a little more intensely, as Rangaku gushed over Jin's knowledge of spiritual energy. So, Jin-san, do you reside in this area? In an effort to divert the Silverette's focus from Rangaku, he inquired. No, I don't. I found Rangaku-chan here after getting lost on my way to District 32. She was gracious enough to reroute me to the correct route. Oh, I'm happy she was able to assist at that time. If you understand what I mean, District 64 has a number of characters you wouldn't want to encounter if you want to get to District 32 before nightfall. I suppose you should probably start moving. Actually, right before you discovered us, I had something I wanted to share with Rangaku-chan, and now that I consider it, you will probably be impacted as well. Rangaku and Naruto exchanged a quick, anxious look before returning their focus to Ichimaru. Jin-san, what are you talking about? There has been discussion recently regarding a rise in violence and crime in the lower districts. Murder, gang-related altercations, and robberies are all happening at an alarming rate. Additionally, there are fewer and fewer jobs available for those who do not have a proper place to live. It was getting harder and harder to keep jobs in their district, and it was even harder when they had to find new ones. Naruto's heart sank with every word that came out of Jin's mouth. It also didn't help him in the long run to constantly watch himself and Rangaku for the less favorable characters that prowled the streets at night for any woman or child they could corner. Where precisely is this taking place? Which districts are seeing the highest rates of crime and violence? The blonde with the whiskers inquired. From what I've personally heard so far, Districts 70 through 80 are where it's most prevalent. However, given the current situation, I wouldn't be shocked if your district also experiences some effects. Is that the reason you're attempting to enter District 32? Yes, actually, I am. Then you must have some pretty well-connected friends. I know that the gateways to District 40 and upwards are heavily guarded, and that the only way that someone from the lower districts can ever hope to be allowed passage is by travel papers, but those are extremely hard to come by, especially if you're from the slums. But not if you know people who can make forgeries of said papers that look convincing enough to fool the guards, replied the Silverette. Naruto stared in disbelief at the squinty-eyed, smiling stranger. Attempting to enter the upper districts using fake travel documents was a very risky endeavor, and anyone caught doing so faced harsh punishment. Those papers must have cost an arm and a leg to get. In fact, the Ichimaru boy laughed. I have to admit, the price was quite steep, but I'd say that it was worth the sacrifice for a chance at a better life. My partner and I were going to attempt our little trip 2 days ago, but when I arrived at our meeting place, she never came. It was only yesterday that I learned that she was killed in a massive gang fight. Naruto stayed respectfully silent as Rangaku gasped in horror and instinctively raised her hands to cover her mouth. They were lucky not to be caught in the crossfire, but they had witnessed their share of gang fights. However, if they were lucky enough to survive, those who weren't as fortunate as them were never the same again. Naruto said, I'm so sorry for your loss. He was at a loss for words and just apologized. Thank you. I was, at first, tempted to just forget about the pilgrimage to District 32, but I eventually decided that doing so would be an insult to her memory. I had a few close calls, but one in particular had forced me to take more drastic measures to ensure my escape, which caused me to lose my way. That's when I happened across your friend, and she was willing to help me out. We talked a bit about our lives until you found us, Naruto-san. Jin then returned to Rangaku. But I wanted to ask you something very important, Rangaku-chan. Even though my friend had passed away, I still kept her passage papers, and I was wondering, would you like to come with me to District 32? Come with you? Yelled Rangaku, taken aback by Jin's invitation. But why? I want to give you the chance for a better life. With things getting progressively worse in the lower districts, I thought that it would best if you left while you still had the chance. Granted, I didn't know that you were living with someone, and I apologize for springing this proposition so suddenly in front of you and your friend. But what about Naruto-kun? Isn't there any way that we can find someone that can forge passage papers for him as well? I wish that there was some way to help him, but the man who wrote up these papers had left right after he made papers for my friend and me, and there isn't enough time to search for anyone else to create false papers for your friend. It would cost too much, and our window of opportunity to escape has a time limit. If we want to escape to the upper districts, we would need to leave today. Naruto's mind was roiling with contradictory feelings during the conversation. He was unsure of how to react to the circumstance that had been practically thrown in his face. He was thrilled that Rangaku might be able to leave the slums for a better life. Jealous that this stranger from Jin was giving her a way out. Angry that if Rangaku accepted the proposal, his friend would no longer accompany him on his travels. And he was getting upset with himself for being upset in the first place. The young boy was unable to make sense of it all because it was all so confusing to him. And when he saw that Rangaku's tentative eyes were on him, it only got worse. She wanted his opinion on what to decide, and he could see the uncertainty and nervousness in her eyes. He was touched that she valued his opinion, but he was also a little put off that she might ruin her one and only chance at happiness if he told her not to go, and Naruto felt nauseous just thinking about it. He would never be able to live with himself if he stopped his friend from being happy, even if it was accidentally. Even though he felt like he was driving a rusted knife into his heart with every word he spoke, he smiled and said, "It's all up to you, Rangaku-chan. Whatever you decide to do, I'll always support you." The feeling only got worse when he noticed Rangaku's eyes adopt a determined look that made him feel anxious and afraid. As she started, Naruto turned to avoid seeing Rangaku depart with the stranger who had promised her a way out of District 64. "I really appreciate your offer, Jin-san," she said, "but I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline." Naruto spun back around to face Rangaku, who was grinning brightly at him, not believing what he had just heard. Jin froze, so taken aback by the girl's response that the Silverette's eyes, in all their red splendor, were momentarily visible to the whiskered blonde. Playfully scolding him, she went on, "What? Did you actually think that I would just leave District 64 without you? When we first met, you promised me that you would always be there for me, right? Well, guess what? That promise of yours goes both ways, Buster." But Rangaku-chan, mumbled Naruto, "this could be your only chance to get out of District 64. Are you sure that you really want to give it up?" Jin decided to add his own thoughts and said, "Naruto-san has a point. The living conditions are only going to worsen for this district. It would be best if you escaped as soon as possible." "I know," said Rangaku, "but life in the upper districts just wouldn't be the same without my best friend. I really appreciate your gesture, Jin-san. But I'm not going anywhere without Naruto-kun either. We both leave District 64 together, or no one leaves at all." Flashback comes to an end as Naruto recollected one of his favorite moments. He embraced Rangaku and said, "Of course I do. I could never forget, even if I wanted to." For some inexplicable reason, he always felt relaxed and enjoyed their embraces. Neither of them saw Jin Ichimaru again after that. After Rangaku made it abundantly evident that she would not be leaving Naruto behind, he had departed. Even though Naruto was deeply moved by Rangaku's deep appreciation for their friendship, he occasionally questioned whether she would have been better off choosing the Silverette. Life in District 64 started to deteriorate sharply, just as Jin had predicted. Crime rates had increased in the district, and it was getting harder and harder to find a job, let alone keep one. Initially, there were only robberies and sporadic altercations. However, more horrible crimes like murder, rape, and kidnapping started to happen with frightening regularity. On some nights, Naruto stayed up late to ensure that no sick pervert attempted to do anything with Rangaku even though he was exhausted in the morning. The safety of his friend was more important than a few hours of sleep. Things weren't looking good for the two blondes now that he had lost his job. A haughty male voice sneered, "Ah, well, isn't that sweet? Two street rats, embracing each other in the slums of District 64. When the blondes turned their heads to face the direction of the voice, they saw an extremely unpleasant scene. 3 police officers were standing behind them, all of them glaring at the two of them despite maintaining a composed exterior. Naruto's mind was racing with panic every time he stole from a store. The leader of the 3 had been the lead investigator in his raids, and he had observed that specific officer looking into the scene. Naruto said, "Can we help you, sir?" in an attempt to steer clear of any potential physical altercations. The officer to his commander's left growled, "Yeah, you and your little friend can come with us, quietly, to the station." The smirk remained on the right person's face as he simply nodded. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're talking about. Are we being accused of something? Don't try and play innocent with us, brat. We know that you're responsible for a chain of robberies from several stores in the area throughout the past year and a half, and since your little girlfriend didn't report your crimes, and instead seemed to have profited from them, I'd say that she's your accomplice," the commander almost snarled. Naruto had to use all of his self-control to avoid panicking. The only indication of nervousness was a slight enlargement of his eyes. "Those are some big accusations you're throwing around," he replied. "You 3 had better have substantial evidence to back them up." The boy's words caused the 3 policemen to guffaw cruelly, as though he were a part of an inside joke. In between chuckles, the lead officer asked, "Did y'all hear that, lads? The little bastard is asking for evidence of his crimes, he said, glaring at the young couple. He had finally managed to control his laughter. Well, how's this for undeniable evidence? Your last employer gave us a tip that he caught you with merchandise that had been reported stolen from a store a few weeks ago. And how do you know that he's not lying to you guys? Because he just so happens to be an old friend of mine, you little shit. As Naruto attempted to defend the two of them, Rangaku could no longer bear to remain silent. Then why isn't he in trouble? He was purposely withholding vital information. How come he isn't being incarcerated as well? The commander's subordinates burst into another vicious round of laughter, sending shivers down Naruto and Rangaku's spines. Because, if I have to choose between showing leniency towards two homeless, thieving street rats or a tax-paying supervisor of a restaurant, then it's quite obvious whose side I'm going to take, and here's a hint. It's not yours. In addition to having a nasty habit of being easily persuaded by outside forces, the police officers in District 64 were notorious for their violent behavior towards suspected criminals, which Naruto and Rangaku had already witnessed multiple times. With his subordinates creeping slowly in their direction, the officer went on, and another thing, considering that you lot have managed to remain undetected for so long, you two are going to be locked up for a fairly long time. For a split second, Naruto and Rangaku's eyes slowly locked before they turned around and fled. They didn't get very far, though, because two more officers with their katanas out of their sheaths suddenly materialized in front of them. As they retreated from the new adversaries, they looked over their shoulder and noticed the first three officers coming up, joining the other two to form a circle around them. Oh, I can't tell you how long I've waited to catch you two. After all of the humiliation that we've endured, I hope the both of you aren't afraid of the dark, because it's going to be your new best friend. But don't worry. You two will get to share your suffering together. As his mind frantically attempted to come up with a plan of escape, Naruto's heart rate soared and his gaze flitted from officer to officer. Even so, he was aware of how dire things were for them. He and Rangaku faced 5 highly skilled law enforcement officers who were all aware of their previous behavior. When he felt something grab his hand, it snapped him out of his panicked reverie. He glanced over and saw Rangaku's trembling hand clutching his own. He could tell by the look in her eyes that she was afraid of what would happen next, though he was aware of how pointless it was. Naruto wanted to reassure her and assure her that they would find a way out of their current situation. He remained silent and squeezed her hand firmly while they watched in helplessness as the officers drew nearer. I apologize profusely, Rangaku-chan. When the lead enforcer finally stopped a few feet ahead of them, he thought, I did my best to protect you, but it just wasn't good enough. In a desperate attempt to protect Rangaku from the upcoming beating, Naruto clenched his eyes shut and pulled her into an embrace. He waited for the first blow to land in a tense silence when all of a sudden, Bakudo number 1. Sai. Bakudo number 4. Heinawa. 5 startled yelps echoed through the room, and then there was a sudden burst of light so bright Naruto could barely see it through his eyelids. Unable to comprehend what was happening, Naruto opened one eye slowly, but as he gasped at what he saw, both of his eyes suddenly flew open. Curious, Rangaku turned to see what her friend was staring at, but she was astounded by what she saw. A bright yellow glowing rope was tied around the bodies of the 5 officers, who were all on the ground, struggling in vain to break free. Furthermore, their crossed arms behind their backs gave the impression that they were being held in place by an invisible force. It was a pretty sight, and the two of them agreed in silence that it was far superior to the last one. However, 2 black blurs appeared in front of them before they could even attempt to flee the entire disaster. With their backs to each other, they were both tall, young men in their mid to late 20s. They both had white obi belts fastened around their waists and were dressed in black shiakushos. They wore white tabi socks and straw sandals. The only significant difference between the two was the color of their hair. The right one's was raven black, while the left's was ash gray. You know, the black-haired one said, I could have done this myself after all. This is one of my division's responsibilities. The other man chuckled. That's true, but I thought that you could do with a little help besides. As a member of the 9th Division, it is my sworn duty to be ready in case of emergencies, you know, being in charge of security and everything. Yeah, for all of Gotei 13, and on top of that, you oversee the development of new arts and culture, and are in charge of that Seirei news magazine. My division, however, handles assassination jobs, policing duties, and maintaining the detention facilities. And let's not forget your glorious courier duties, messenger boy. Oi, that's some tough talk coming from a newspaper reporter. You want to start something, fire spitter? The gray-haired man yelled as he and his countrymen literally clashed. Maybe I do. What are you going to do about it, tree hugger? The ravenet shot back, pressing his own forehead against the man's to counter. The hogtied policeman's leader made his presence known before the two Shinigami could continue their argument. "You arrogant Shinigami scum. Release me this instant," he said. The Ravenet approached the immobilized policeman until he was directly in front of him, his toes inches from the man's nose, and silently agreed to postpone their small argument until later. Without even trying to show his disdain, the policeman sneered as he looked up at the Shinigami. "You Shinigami bastards. Who do you think you're doing, trying to muscle in on my jurisdiction?" "What I'm doing, you despicable, corrupt piece of shit," said the Shinigami, "is my job. Making sure that scum like you and your cronies are properly punished. And considering your long list of crimes, Kamada, I'd say that every single one of you will be lucky enough to avoid getting the death sentence. You can't do this to us. Where's your proof? 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 How about the countless instances in which you and your little followers have repeatedly gotten away with extortion, blackmail, accepting bribes, making arrests under false pretenses, rape, and let's not forget about murder? And don't even think about trying to deny your horrendous crimes, you despicable son of a bitch. We've had an agent on the inside for the past few months, gathering all of the evidence that we'll need in order to make sure all of you never see the light of day." Suddenly a number of black-clothed Shinigami, further upsetting the teens, the Shinigami with the spiked black hair ordered, "Take these scumbags into custody immediately. I want them processed and behind bars yesterday." Kamada, along with his group, yelled, "You bastards! You shit-eating, rat bastards! You won't get away with this," as they were being pulled away. As if he had witnessed such a scenario many times before, the gray-haired Shinigami remarked, "TCH, they always say that." He then pointed to the two teenagers who had seen the whole mess and were probably being pursued by Kamada and his thugs. "Well, people do stupid shit when they're desperate." He started to say something like, "I can't begin to apologize for what you've had to experience from that lot. Are the two of you okay? Do any of you nay?" But as soon as he turned to face them, it died in his throat, giving Naruto the opportunity to finally get a good look at one of their rescuers. The man's eyes were charcoal black, his face was angular, and he had some faint scarring on his right side. His hair was spiky black. A peculiar emblem that Naruto had never seen before was located on the left side of his Shiakusho, approximately where his left pectoral would be. It was a white diamond-shaped patch with tiny black triangles encircling the short ends. It featured a black basque flower underneath the kanji character for the number 2 in the center. There was a dark orange border around the whole patch. However, the man's shocked expression, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing, was what Naruto found most striking. The Shinigami abruptly awoke the children from their daze with the words, what the hell are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." Naruto experienced acute deja vu right away, focusing on his early days in the Soul Society and while he was still alive. Rangaku immediately defended him, saying, "Hey, you can't talk to him like that. Just who do you think you are?" Instead, as though anticipating that their purported savior would turn on them and they would need to make an abrupt getaway, she tightened her grip on his hand. The Ravenet pointed directly at the boy and retorted, "What? No, 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 I mean you're not supposed to be here yet, you're supposed to still be alive. What is he discussing?" Naruto thought, what is he talking about? I should still be alive when I was still a ninja. Was this guy keeping an eye on me? When the second Shinigami noticed the disturbance, he interrupted, "Whoa, now hold up for a second. What's gotten you so worked up, Uchiha?" He had a white and black diamond patch on the left side of his Shiakusho, just like his cohort. However, his had a tenna-colored border, a white poppy flower, and the kanji character for the number 9. However, Naruto only needed to look at the man's face once to be drawn in. It was similar to searching for the blonde with the whiskers in the mirror. The adult in front of him was nearly identical to him except for the sandy, ash-gray hair, semi-blushed cheeks, and green-gray eyes. Hell, the man might be a lost older brother, an uncle, a distant cousin, or perhaps just dad.